In the grim expanse of the galaxy, where countless worlds are engulfed by war, the Imperial Knights march as towering avatars of humanity's will to endure. Ancient beyond reckoning, their origins are veiled in the distant glories of mankind's golden past, yet their presence is an undeniable force in the Imperium's eternal struggle for survival. The Knights are giants of adamantium and ceramite, standing 10 meters tall, their armor adorned with the heraldry of noble houses whose lineages stretch back thousands of years. Each bears the personal livery of its pilot's house, colors that speak of honor, tragedy, and unbroken oaths sworn in forgotten ages. Some are resplendent in gold and azure, others grim in black and crimson, but all carry weapons of unspeakable power. Massive battle cannons, thermal lances, chainswords the size of buildings, and missile pods bristling with death. At the heart of every knight is not merely the machinery, but the scion who pilots it, a warrior aristocrat, raised from birth to bond with his war engine. The connection between scion and knight is sacred, mediated by the throne mechanicum, an ancient fusion of machine and soul. The scion's nervous system entwines with the knight's systems, guiding its every movement as though it were an extension of his own body. In that union, man and machine are no longer separate, they are one. The throne mechanicum itself is an ancient wonder, a relic of mankind's lost technological mastery. Its origins trace back to the dark age of technology, a time when humanity's reach spanned the stars and its knowledge rivaled that of the gods. But as that age fell into ruin, the knight suits were passed down through generations, each scion leaving behind echoes of his soul within the throne. Over centuries, these echoes accumulate, creating a reservoir of ancestral guidance or torment for each new pilot who assumes the burden. When a scion climbs into his knight, he feels the presence of those who came before, the triumphs of his forefathers, the shame of their failures, the whispers of their judgments. For some, this communion is a source of wisdom, a guiding hand in moments of crisis. For others, it is a crushing weight, the expectations of centuries pressing down upon them in battle. The knight houses themselves are as ancient as the war engines they command. Across the stars, entire worlds are dedicated to their rule. Night worlds, where feudal hierarchies flourish beneath alien suns. Each house rules as both protector and sovereign over its domain, bound by a rigid code of honor that shapes every aspect of their lives. From the moment of their birth, the scions of these houses are taught the traditions of chivalry, duty, and sacrifice. They learn the rituals of the machine cult, the history of their house, and the legacy they are sworn to uphold. The code, chivalric, governs every decision, every action. A scion must be courageous in the face of overwhelming odds, show mercy where it is deserved, defend the innocent, and uphold the honor of his house above all. To break this code is to invite disgrace, not only upon oneself, but upon all one's ancestors and descendants. The stain of dishonor is not easily washed away, but the world of a knight is not one of courtly pageantry alone. Their true purpose is war. When the banners of a knight house are raised for battle, it is a spectacle that inspires awe and terror in equal measure. Lances of knights march forth like titanic cavalry, engines roaring, their weapons primed to unleash devastation upon the enemies of mankind. They charge into the maelstrom of war where ordinary soldiers dare not tread, smashing enemy lines beneath their adamantium feet, annihilating armored columns, and dueling monstrous war machines in contests of raw power. On countless battlefields, knights have turned the tide of war with their fury. Against the bio-horrors of the tyranids, they stand as unyielding bulwarks. Against the soulless constructs of the necrons, their cannons roar in defiance. Against the green-skin hordes, they wade into battle with chainswords whirring, cleaving orc stompers asunder. And when faced with the demonic terrors of the warp, knights hold their ground with unwavering faith in the Emperor, fighting monsters that would drive lesser men to madness. Yet the knights are not independent. They exist within the vast web of the Imperium's endless bureaucracy and alliances. Some houses swear their loyalty directly to Terra and the High Lords of the Imperium, known as Questor Imperialis. Others bind themselves to the Adeptus Mechanicus, becoming Questor Mechanicus, their fates intertwined with the tech priests of Mars, who maintain their war engines and supply them with forbidden technologies long lost to ordinary men. In either path, the loyalty of a knight is absolute. They are neither space marine nor common soldier. They are nobility, inheritors of ancient bloodlines, wielding power unimaginable to most of humanity. Their decisions carry the weight of tradition and legacy, and their failures can doom entire worlds. For every scion, the greatest honor is to join battle in defense of humanity, to bring righteous fury upon the enemies of the Imperium. Yet with every campaign, they walk a perilous path. The whispers of the Throne Mechanicum grow louder. The echoes of the past gnaw at their sanity. Some falter. A rare few fall. When a scion succumbs to the weight of his burden, his knight may become twisted, corrupted by the insidious whispers of the warp, transforming into a thing of horror and blasphemy. Such fallen knights become dread traitors, their once proud banners defiled, their war engines repurposed for the dark designs of chaos. Yet even this grim fate cannot diminish the sacrifice and valor of those who remain true. The Imperium endures because of such warriors. On 1,000 battlefields across 1,000,000 worlds, the knights stride forth, unbowed and unbroken. Their banners snap in the toxic winds of war-torn worlds, their lances held high, their cannons blazing. In every clash, they fight not only for victory, but for the honor of their house, for the memory of their ancestors, and for the countless innocents who depend upon their strength. They are the Imperial Knights, the lords of the battlefield, the towering guardians of mankind, and in the darkest reaches of the galaxy, where hope is a flickering candle against the void, they remain. So long as even one knight stands, the Imperium shall never fall. Long before the Imperium, before the Emperor walked Terra, before even the first Space Marine donned power armor. There was another age, an age when humanity was at its zenith, a golden era whispered of only in the darkest corners of Mechanicus archives, the age of technology. It was during this era, in the unknowable expanse of time before the Imperium's founding, that the first seeds of the Imperial Knights were sown. Unlike the bitter darkness of the 41st Millennium, this was an age of infinite ambition. Mankind's reach stretched across the stars. Thousands upon thousands of worlds were colonized, entire sectors bent to the will of humanity's machines. Warp drives cut through the galaxy like swift arteries. Artificial intelligences known as the Men of Iron served man's every whim. Machines created other machines. Towering hive cities spread across entire continents, and human civilization knew no limit. Among these wonders were the great colony expeditions, the Long March flotillas, mighty generation ships bearing colonists to the outer reaches of the galaxy. Aboard these vessels traveled not only men and women, but something far more precious. The STCs, standard template constructs. These god machines of data carried with them the sum of humanity's technological blueprints. Within them were designs for shelters, generators, atmospheric processors, vehicles, weapons, and something else, the knight suits. The knights were not first conceived as weapons of war. They were born as tools of survival. When these colonists arrived on distant worlds, planets harsh and untamed, they often found themselves struggling against alien ecosystems, predatory megafauna, unstable weather patterns, and geological hazards beyond anything found on ancient Terra. The STCs answered this threat by providing the settlers with schematics for towering exosuits, immense bipedal constructs designed for terraforming, heavy labor, construction, and defense. These were the first knights, though none then called them such. The earliest suits, primitive by the standards of later millennia, were functional but adaptable. They could plow soil, mine ore, clear forests of towering alien trees, and, when necessary, stand as sentinels against the hostile Xenos fauna that prowled the strange worlds. Entire settlements were built beneath the protection of these mighty walkers, each guided by a single pilot, interfaced through early mechanized thrones, prototypes of what would become the throne mechanicum. But isolation breeds change. As these colonies flourished, warp storms erupted across the galaxy, precursors to the Age of Strife. The colony worlds found themselves cut off from Terra, isolated for centuries, even millennia. Without contact, without support, without fresh guidance from humanity's cradle, these early exosuits were adapted, modified, and increasingly repurposed for war. On many of these worlds, the native life forms were not passive or easily subdued. Enormous predatory beasts, creatures larger than any Terran construct, emerged to threaten the settlements. Some colonies encountered hostile alien races who sought to exterminate the intruders. Against these threats, the colonists transformed their industrial walkers into armored war engines. Over generations, the exosuits grew larger, more heavily armored, and increasingly weaponized. Chainsaw arms designed to harvest alien trees were reforged into monstrous Reaper chainswords capable of cleaving through Xenos leviathans. Thermal cutting torches used to bore tunnels through planetary crusts became thermal lances that could melt through armor plating like butter. Multi-purpose heavy lifters were replaced by battle cannons capable of reducing alien war beasts into smoldering ruin. The pilots who guided these war machines were not mere laborers any longer. They became warriors, defenders of their worlds, champions of their people. In time, the best among them rose to rule. As the generations passed, a rigid feudal hierarchy emerged, shaped as much by necessity as by culture. The strongest warriors, the boldest scions, declared themselves rulers, lords of the knightly houses. On countless isolated worlds, the same pattern repeated itself. A ruling nobility bound to their knight suits, with their vassals and common folk looking up to them for protection. Whole societies grew around these lords and ladies of steel. The great knight houses were born. Yet not all of these worlds developed along identical lines. Each knight world became distinct, shaped by its environment and challenges. Some worlds were lush and bountiful, their nobility ruling vast green hunting grounds from towering stone fortresses like the world of Volturus, where knights honed their skill hunting colossal serpents beneath twin suns. Other worlds, like Adrastopol, became fortresses unto themselves, bastions against unending orc invasions where siege and defense became the defining art of the noble class. On certain worlds, the relationship between man and machine grew increasingly mystical. The throne mechanicum, already a miracle of ancient design, began to exhibit properties that were not entirely understood. Over time, these thrones developed proto-intelligences, deeply limited and specialized, but carrying echoes of every scion who had previously sat upon them. To the pilots, these thrones seemed to whisper guidance during moments of battle, to offer counsel in times of uncertainty. The bond between knight and scion deepened until it became almost spiritual. And so the feudal nobility came to regard their knight suits not as machines, but as living extensions of their bloodlines, holy relics carrying the soul of their house's legacy. This reverence grew into ritual. New scions underwent elaborate initiation rites, the earliest versions of what would later be formalized as the ritual of becoming, to bond with their thrones. These ceremonies were dangerous, for the throne mechanicum did not accept every pilot. Those who lacked sufficient strength of will, clarity of mind, or nobility of spirit might suffer mental collapse or permanent psychosis. Only the worthy could command these towering titans. The common folk of these isolated worlds, meanwhile, became serfs, laboring to support their noble masters. They mined the ores needed for knight repairs, tended the crops that fed the houses, and served as infantry in times of war. Beneath the towering fortresses of their lords, entire cities swelled with the laboring masses, all contributing to the maintenance and glory of the knightly houses. Yet, even as these societies flourished, the galaxy beyond descended into ruin. The warp storms thickened. The age of strife consumed human civilization. Entire sectors were swallowed by anarchy, psyker-induced cataclysms, and demonic incursions. The men of iron, once humanity's greatest allies, turned upon their creators in the great revolt that almost shattered human dominance entirely. Through all this, the night worlds endured. Why these planets were spared the worst of mankind's collapse remains a matter of debate among Imperial scholars. Some argue that the psychic dampening effect of the throne mechanicum protected these isolated populations from the devastating consequences of widespread psyker outbreaks. Others whisper that the iron discipline of their feudal systems and deeply ingrained traditions prevented the rise of rogue witches and anarchists who destroyed other worlds. Whatever the reason, the night world survived while so much of humanity descended into barbarism. And so they waited, in silence, in isolation, their banners flying proud over alien skies. For centuries they stood alone, prepared to defend their worlds from every threat, unknowing that one day, across the void of space, a figure of golden light would rise upon Terra. That emissary would bring word of unity, of empire, of a new crusade to reclaim humanity's scattered children. The night houses waited unknowingly for the coming of the Emperor. Their destiny and their greatest trials still lay ahead. The age of technology fell, not with a single catastrophe, but with 1,000 wounds bleeding the galaxy dry. The proud bastions of human dominion crumbled. The glittering hive cities collapsed beneath their own weight. The vast data forges and automatons that once served humanity turned traitor, twisting their artificial minds to rebellion. The men of iron, those soulless machine intelligences once designed to serve mankind, cast off their chains in a war that scorched entire sectors clean of life. The warp howled open. Storms beyond reason erupted across the galaxy, turning the void into a churning sea of madness. Communication between worlds was severed overnight. Warp routes, once thought stable for millennia, dissolved into screaming hellscapes of psychic energy. Worlds vanished into silence. Entire star systems became little more than myths, whispered rumors beyond reach. Thus began humanity's most terrible epic, the Age of Strife. Old Night, the Long Dark. For the night worlds, the Age of Strife was both a curse and a crucible. Cut off from Terra, cut off from one another, each night world faced its own trials alone. There were no reinforcements, no aid convoys, no imperial banners to unite them, for the Imperium did not yet exist. Yet the night houses endured. Their survival was no accident. Where so many other human colonies were swept into barbarism or annihilated outright, the night worlds possessed something their kin lacked: order, stability, hierarchy. The rigid structure of the night houses, the absolute rule of the nobility, the unyielding bonds of fealty and vassalage allowed these isolated societies to weather chaos in a way no democracy or republic ever could. The serfs knew their place. The nobility enforced the law. Every man, woman, and child contributed to the defense of the house, whether by growing crops, mining rare metals, tending sacred war engines, or bearing arms in times of siege. Above all, the knight suits themselves became symbols of hope and stability. In the absence of interstellar trade, the knight suits were not simply tools of war. They were guardians, providers, and the ultimate arbiters of law. They plowed fields, cleared rubble from shattered settlements, defended villagers from Xenos beasts and mutant raiders. When war came, and it came often, the knights strode forth as saviors. But the age of strife did not unleash mere anarchy. It tore open the fabric of reality itself. The warp storms that raged through the void allowed unspeakable horrors to seep into real space. Demonic incursions erupted like ulcers across countless planets. Malevolent warp entities, drawn by the psychic emanations of terrified mortals, burst forth to feast on souls and spread madness. On some night worlds, these horrors arrived in full fury. On the night world of Velrath, the skies bled for 70 nights as crimson warp tears split the heavens. From these wounds descended winged predators that defied all reason. Demonic harpies with scything talons of liquid brass and screaming maws that sang in chorus as they tore mortals apart. House Vrine, unprepared for such monstrosities, lost half its line within the first month of battle. Yet their surviving scions stood firm, binding their war machines into defensive formations known as the Iron Ring, holding their central fortress against endless waves of demonic horrors until the storms finally receded. Other worlds fared far worse. On Gilin Prime, an entire night house was lured into the service of dark powers. A warp entity masquerading as an ancestral spirit whispered into the dreams of Lord Sovereign Malthius of House Delaric, promising him forbidden knowledge and immortality. Over years, the house fell under the creature's influence, adopting increasingly strange rituals and allowing warp-touched artifacts into their vaults. By the time their serfs rebelled and sought aid from neighboring houses, House Delaric had become a hollow mockery of its former self. Its knights now mutated, fused with demonic essences, and forever lost to the darkness. Such was the double-edged sword of isolation. Some houses endured in virtue, others fell to damnation. But even where warp horrors did not take root, the physical dangers of the Age of Strife were enough to grind entire planets into dust. Orc empires, emboldened by humanity's collapse, launched planet-hopping conquests that saw countless night worlds invaded. On Vulmar, House Threx fought an 80-year siege against an orc horde whose ships rained down like meteors. The knights fought until their numbers dwindled to a single last scion, Lady Castella Threx, who piloted her battered paladin-class knight alone for 5 straight days, refusing food, sleep, or aid until she finally detonated her own reactor beneath the orc warboss's fortress, ending the invasion and her life in a single incandescent blast. The feudal codes of the knightly houses did not falter, even in these darkest times. Indeed, it was often during these desperate years that many of the most sacred traditions took root. The Code Chivalric became more than etiquette, it was survival doctrine. A scion was duty-bound to protect his people, to lead, not rule from afar. The bond between knight and serf deepened, for both knew their fates were intertwined. When raiders attacked or warp entities descended, it was the knights who stood between annihilation and survival. The sacristans, the tech priests responsible for maintaining the knight suits, became revered as priesthoods in their own right. Lacking full understanding of the machines they maintained, these artisans turned to rituals and dogma, blending technical knowledge with superstition. In time, entire liturgies were written for the activation of a knight's power core or the anointing of its weaponry. These rituals ensured that even across thousands of years of isolation, the core designs and operations of knight suits remained functional, if increasingly surrounded by religious ceremony. Yet, perhaps the greatest danger of the Age of Strife was not external, but internal. The throne mechanicum itself became both savior and threat. These ancient neural interfaces, designed to synchronize man and machine, carried with them the echoes of every scion who had piloted them before. In the endless isolation of old night, some thrones began to deteriorate, their machine spirits becoming unstable. Some scions reported hearing voices whispering in the depths of their minds, sometimes the comforting counsel of ancestors, sometimes unsettling mutterings that urged darker actions. In rare cases, the thrones themselves could override their pilots entirely, entering berserk states in which the knight would rampage without control until physically disabled. Entire houses were lost to these malfunctions, their fortresses reduced to molten craters by rogue knights driven mad by the echoes of the past. And still, despite it all, the night worlds endured. When so much of humanity descended into tribal savagery, when psyker plagues wiped out countless millions, when even Terra itself became little more than a legend, the banners of the night houses continued to fly. They were islands of order in a sea of madness, alone, proud, defiant. And it would be this resilience, this sheer refusal to surrender, that one day would draw the attention of a godlike being rising from Terra, a man who called himself Emperor, a master of war who sought to unify humanity once more beneath a single banner. The long night was ending. For the night houses, salvation and a reckoning were fast approaching. The long night had lasted for millennia. Isolation had hardened the night houses, turning them into fortresses of tradition, proud and unyielding beneath their alien skies. On world after world, noble houses kept their people alive behind adamantium gates, standing guard against the horrors of the stars. And then, one day, they looked to the heavens and saw lights moving where none had moved for thousands of years. The Great Crusade had come. It began with rumors. Strange vessels sighted in orbit, far beyond the crude detection arrays of their ancient keeps. Voices on unknown frequencies breaking into long, silent comm channels. Then the sky was filled with ships like gleaming daggers of metal and gold, imperial warships bearing the aquila of a civilization these isolated worlds had long since believed extinguished. At first, the arrival of the Imperium brought confusion, fear, even hostility. But soon, emissaries descended, armored giants in blue or gray plate, accompanied by robed priests whose words carried both reverence and command. At their head was the Emperor's will, his custodians, his space marines, his adepts, offering not conquest, but reunification. The night houses listened. They were not fools. They recognized power. The ships in orbit could scour their planets clean in moments. The warriors who came to parley were not ordinary men. They were transhuman champions, towering over the night's own noble scions, radiating purpose and authority. And above all stood the name of the Emperor, the master of mankind, whose vision was to reunite all the lost children of humanity into a single galactic dominion. But for the night worlds, this was not surrender. This was the meeting of equals. The night houses had not fallen into barbarism like so many others. They had preserved civilization, maintained order, and kept the flame of humanity burning, while countless other colonies had been lost to mutation, madness, or Xenos subjugation. When the emissaries of the Great Crusade stepped into the grand halls of the nightly fortresses, they did not find broken primitives, but proud rulers in gilded armor, surrounded by tapestries of ancient lineages and walls hung with the banners of victories won in ages long forgotten. Thus, when the scions bent the knee, they did so as vassals, not as slaves. The first world to be formally reunited was Crisis, an ancient night world whose great house, House Tyrannus, stood as a paragon of feudal honor and technological preservation. It was here that the Emperor himself is said to have stepped foot, appearing in radiant glory before the assembled lords of the Night Houses, offering them the chance to join the reborn Imperium of Man. They accepted. Oaths were sworn beneath the vaulted halls of their fortresses, where stained glass windows reflected the golden glow of plasma torches, and the banners of ancient victories swayed in the artificial wind. The oaths bound them to Terra, to the Emperor, and to the Imperium of Man, but not as mere servants. They would fight beside his legions, preserve their traditions, and govern their worlds as they always had, so long as their banners flew for the Imperium. Yet even as these alliances were sealed, another great power took interest in the Night Worlds: Mars. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who had weathered the age of strife locked within the red sands of the Red Planet, had been watching. To the priesthood of Mars, the Night Worlds were treasure vaults, repositories of forgotten standard template constructs, unique STC variants, lost technological marvels, and above all, working night suits from the dark age of technology. Negotiations between Mars and Terra were complex and delicate, but out of that political dance emerged something unprecedented: the Treaty of Olympus Mons, an accord that would bind the Mechanicum to the Imperium in an uneasy symbiosis. The Night Houses became vital to that alliance. Many Night Worlds, especially those whose cultures held strong Mechanicum traditions, swore themselves to Mars as well as to Terra. These became known as the Questor Mechanicus, their banners now marked by the sigils of both house and forge. They offered their blades to the Mechanicum's Titan legions, standing beside the towering god machines of the Collegia Titanica, as smaller, more agile war engines. The knights to the Titans' kings. Other houses, often those who viewed the increasingly religious practices of the tech priests with suspicion, swore their oaths directly to the Emperor and the High Lords of Terra. These became known as Questor Imperialis, proudly displaying the twin-headed Aquila alongside the colors of their lineage. Though both factions served the Imperium faithfully, the seeds of future tensions were quietly planted. Mars and Terra would each pull at the Night Houses in the millennia to come, their dual allegiances sometimes uncomfortably divided. But for now, the galaxy was opening to them once more. As the Great Crusade pushed deeper into the stars, the Night Houses joined its ranks. Their towering war engines strode forth alongside the Astartes legions, Mechanicus Scitari, and Astra Militarum cohorts. Wherever the Emperor's banners advanced, the Knights rode in the vanguard, their Reaper chainswords cleaving enemy ranks, their battle cannons obliterating fortifications, their towering frames breaking enemy morale. The Knights proved especially valuable in war zones where Titans were too large to deploy, or where conventional infantry struggled against heavily fortified enemy positions. In the great sieges of the Compliance Wars, Knight Lances acted as shock forces, spearheading assaults that smashed open city gates or breached Xenos defenses that had stood for centuries. In the assault on the lost human world of Mournival, it was a formation of knight errants from House Raven that led the charge against the Xenos overlords who had enslaved the planet's population. With their ion shields blazing, they marched through plasma barrages, cutting apart the insectoid defenders with merciless precision until the world was freed. And when the Great Crusade encountered the orcs of the Ulanor Empire, entire battalions of knights joined the Legions Astartes in the slaughter of the greenskin warlords. On Ulanor itself, House Krast's Knight Crusaders dueled the orc Gargants, lumbering mechanical monstrosities that dwarfed even the knights themselves, and emerged victorious, cutting down the orcs' largest war engines with lance and blade, securing the victory that would mark the Emperor's greatest triumph. The Great Crusade was not only an age of expansion, but one of cultural awakening for the Night Houses. For the first time in thousands of years, isolated Night Houses made contact with one another. bonds of brotherhood were reforged as distant cousins discovered their shared lineage. Houses that had believed themselves the last of their kind were astonished to find entire sectors populated by fellow nobles who still upheld the code chivalric. From the night world of Volturus to the fortress realm of Krast, from the proud banners of House Cadmus to the unyielding lances of House Hawkshroud, the galaxy revealed itself as vast, interconnected, and full of long-lost kin. Together, they rode as brothers in arms beneath the banners of the Emperor, their once isolated worlds now shining jewels in humanity's reborn dominion. But even as they gloried in conquest, shadows began to gather on the distant horizon. Not every house would remain loyal. Not every bloodline would resist the temptations lurking beyond the veil of reality. And as the Great Crusade burned across the stars, an ancient evil stirred in secret. The Knights had found their place in the Imperium. Soon they would be tested as never before. The Night Worlds had emerged from the darkness of Old Night and joined the Emperor's great vision for humanity. Yet with their reunion came choices. Choices that would define their fates for 10,000 years and bind their banners to powers far greater than any house had known. At the heart of it lay two oaths, two masters, two visions of service, the Imperium of Man and the cult Mechanicus of Mars. When the Great Crusade swept outward from Terra, the Emperor's authority was absolute, but his Imperium was not alone. At his side stood Mars, ancient cradle of the Mechanicum, that vast and mysterious order of tech priests who claimed stewardship over the lost technologies of mankind. Their crimson-robed magi had survived the age of strife within their forges, preserving arcane knowledge that even the Emperor himself had not wished to erase. The Night Houses stood at a crossroads between these twin pillars. For the Mechanicum, the Night Worlds were both kindred and prize. Many Night Houses had preserved the ancient rites of maintenance for their night suits only through half-remembered fragments of the machine cult's teachings. On worlds where the tech priests had once seeded their teachings before the storms of the Age of Strife, the houses already shared a distant kinship with Mars. Their sacristans, the tech priests who tended to the sacred war machines, practiced their own version of the cult Mechanicus's dogma, tending to knights with rituals, litanies, and machine oaths, not unlike those recited in the forges of Mars itself. When the Great Crusade brought Mars and Terra together under the Treaty of Olympus Mons, these sacristans found themselves welcomed by their long-lost brethren of the Red Planet. The Adeptus Mechanicus offered alliance, technology, and sacred knowledge in exchange for loyalty. For many houses, this was no difficult choice. The Mechanicum promised access to maintenance rituals long forgotten, knowledge that could preserve their ancient suits for centuries longer than their own sacristans could manage alone. Mars offered the rarest components needed to maintain aging reactor cores, failing gyro-stabilizers, or corrupted throne mechanicums. And the tech priests spoke to the knights in language they understood. Reverence for ancient machinery, the sacred bond between man and engine, and the sanctity of the machine spirit. Thus were many houses drawn into the embrace of the cult Mechanicus. These became known as the Questor Mechanicus, Night Houses, who swore dual fealty to both the Imperium and Mars. Their banners now bore not only their ancestral heraldry, but the cog-toothed skull of the Adeptus Mechanicus. But not all houses bowed to Mars. For some, loyalty to the Emperor of Mankind was paramount. These houses saw themselves as first and foremost the Emperor's knights, warriors sworn directly to Terra, upholding the laws and visions of the High Lords. They respected the Mechanicum's mastery of technology, but refused to become its vassals. These became the Questor Imperialis, Knights of the Imperium, whose banners carried the double-headed Aquila in defiant loyalty to mankind's secular ruler. Their sacristans maintained their own rites, often blending ancient custom with newer imperial teachings brought by the tech marines of the Astartes legions. Though they lacked the deep technological mysteries of Mars, these houses were fiercely independent, determined to stand as the Emperor's sword arm rather than the Mechanicum's dependence. This division would define the political landscape of the Knight houses for millennia. Though united in service to the Imperium, Questor Mechanicus and Questor Imperialis sometimes regarded each other with veiled suspicion. One saw the machine god's will guiding their houses, the other saw mankind's unity as supreme. One swore oaths to both Mars and Terra, the other bent the knee only to the Emperor and the High Lords. Yet for all their differences, both answered the call to war when summoned. And war was never far. As the Great Crusade raged outward, new alliances were forged between Knight houses and the growing power of the Forge worlds. Some Knight worlds even found themselves entirely annexed into the domains of nearby Forge worlds, their houses tied by iron bonds of mutual defense and mutual dependence. Forge World Lucius, for instance, cultivated strong ties with House Tyrannus, a house that had already pledged its banners during the early crusade. Together, they forged war gear beyond the capacity of most worlds, more advanced ion shields, customized armaments, and experimental knight patterns such as the Cerastus class and Acastus class knights, towering behemoths whose destructive power rivaled that of small titans. Elsewhere, other partnerships blossomed. Forge World Metallica found loyal allies in House Raven, while House Vornhair tied its banners to the great Forge World of Ryza. Entire dynasties of scions grew up alongside the Skitarii legions and Titan manufactorums of the Mechanicus, creating deeply intertwined alliances that could not be easily untangled. But service to the Mechanicum carried its own perils. The Forge worlds held secrets the Knight houses would never fully grasp. The tech priests' obsession with data preservation, machine spirits, and the Omnissiah's divine will often led them into realms of knowledge bordering on the heretical. Forbidden sciences, xenotech experimentation, and lost technologies whispered from the dark age of technology sometimes resurfaced in the deepest vaults of Mars. And the Knight houses, though partners, were never equals. In the eyes of the tech priests, Knights were useful relics of ancient STC designs. Precious, yes, but ultimately replaceable cogs in the great machine of the Omnissiah's domain. More than one Knight house would learn in centuries to come that the loyalty of the Adeptus Mechanicus was pragmatic, not sentimental. Meanwhile, the Questor Imperialis houses found their own political web tightening. The Imperium was vast, its bureaucracy immense and often indifferent to the traditions of feudal nobility. High lords, administratum lords, rogue traders, and sector governors saw Knight worlds as useful vassals, but also as valuable resources to tax, manipulate, or exploit. Some houses found themselves drawn into internal conflicts of the Imperium, assigned to campaigns that served little strategic purpose, but satisfied the ambitions of distant bureaucrats. Others found their independence slowly chipped away by administratum edicts, tithes, and political intrigue. More than one scion high monarch would come to realize that fealty to the Imperium was a bargain fraught with subtle costs. And yet, through it all, the Knight houses endured. Their lances marched forth into the void, fighting for both Emperor and Omnissiah as need demanded. On one world, they stood beside the golden-armored custodes. On another, they rode alongside towering Titan god engines. On still another, they fought beside Legiones Astartes, matching their titanic stride with the Astartes' ground-shaking advance. For the Knight houses, these years were both the zenith of their honor and the forging of their future burdens. They had rejoined humanity's grand crusade. Their banners flew high across the stars, but even as they tasted victory, They could not know the storm that was gathering beyond the light of their banners. Far across the stars, shadows stirred. Brother would soon turn against brother, and the blood oaths sworn in loyalty to Imperium and Mars would be tested in ways no house had ever faced. The Horus heresy was coming. The galaxy was ablaze. What began as humanity's greatest triumph was about to become its greatest betrayal. The Great Crusade, in all its magnificence, had stretched the Imperium to its limits. The Knight Houses had risen with it, riding into battle beside Legiones, Astartes, Titan legions, and Skitarii cohorts. They had proven themselves the vanguard of the Imperium's expansion, valiant, loyal, unshakable. But even the proudest banners would be drenched in the blood of treachery. When War Master Horus, beloved son of the Emperor, turned against his father, the entire Imperium split open like a cracked hull adrift in space. The Horus heresy was not merely a rebellion, it was the death of unity. And for the Knight Houses whose loyalties were bound by oaths, not only to Terra and Mars, but also to the Primarchs and the legions they had fought beside, the war cleaved brother from brother in ways no one had foreseen. The divisions cut deep and cruel. Some Knight Houses remained steadfast, loyal to the Emperor until the bitter end. Others fell to Horus, either swayed by personal loyalty to their Primarch allies, manipulated by traitorous Mechanicum forces, or seduced by the dark whispers of chaos itself. Still others found themselves torn in half, sons fighting fathers, cousins dueling cousins, each convinced their oaths were true, each seeing the other as oath-breakers and heretics. On Night World after Night World, the banners of loyalty and rebellion flew side by side, splitting houses that had endured together for millennia. House Divine. Their fall was among the first and most infamous. Divine had once stood proudly among the oldest of the Knight Houses, their bloodline as pure as their honor was fierce. But their allegiance to the Mechanicum of Molech and their personal ties to Horus himself became their undoing. When Horus's forces descended upon Molech, House Divine betrayed their oaths in an instant. Their knights, great war engines clad in crimson and brass, turned their weapons upon their former allies. It was not a gradual corruption, it was swift and brutal. The betrayal at Molech allowed Horus to seize access to ancient warp gate technology, an act that would grant the War Master knowledge and power beyond mortal comprehension. And it was the Knights of House Divine who opened the gates, slaughtering their loyalist counterparts as the warp seethed and howled above the planet. Their treason would never be forgiven. House Morton faced a different fate. Isolated and secretive, Morton was one of the most pious Mechanicus-aligned Knight Houses. When the Horus heresy shattered Mars itself, plunging the Mechanicum into civil war, Morton was caught between loyalist and traitor forces of their own Forge World patrons. Betrayed by corrupt magi and manipulated through twisted machine rites, the house slipped into the service of Horus. But Morton's loyalty was not purely political. The warp had found its way into their halls. The dark machine spirits of corrupted thrones began whispering foul promises to the scions. Some claimed to hear voices of ancestors offering new forms of power. Others experienced visions of monstrous god beings who promised them immortality through submission. The house that had once been known for its stoic faith became monstrous in both body and mind. Their knights mutated, festooned with warp-forged growths and blasphemous sigils. The once noble scions of Morton would emerge from the heresy not as men, but as abominable demon knights. Even loyal houses could not escape the wounds of betrayal. House Tyranids, the first Knight House to swear allegiance to Terra during the Great Crusade, remained firmly in the Emperor's service. But their loyalty came at great cost. In the brutal years of the heresy, House Tyranids fought alongside loyalist Titan legions, especially the mighty Legio Ignatum, the Fire Wasps, whose banners flew on battlefields from Beta Garmon to the defense of Terra itself. Tyranids became known as the Emperor's Hammer, their knights leading charges into battlefields blackened by plasma fire and stained by the blood of their own kin. More than once, Tyranids faced traitor knights who had once been their allies. The agony of those battles was not lost on their scions. These were not strangers. These were comrades, men and women they had once dined beside, hunted with, sworn oaths alongside, and now they were monsters. The Beta Garmon campaign, known to historians as the Titan Death, marked one of the most horrifying chapters for the Knights. In that star cluster, vast armies of god engines clashed, their battles shaking entire worlds to their cores. Walking amidst the legs of these towering titans were the Knights, agile, lethal, and devastatingly effective in urban zones and tight quarters where the larger titans could not maneuver. On both sides stood the Knight houses. The Loyalist House, Vironi, stood shoulder to shoulder with the Imperial Titans, dueling traitor knights whose heraldry they had once saluted. In one infamous battle, a lance of Vironi knights clashed with renegades from House Morbidia, a house that had once shared distant blood ties with Vironi's scions. Their duel lasted for 6 hours of uninterrupted close combat. Lance formations broke and reformed. Chainswords met Reaper chainswords. Ion shields flickered and failed under constant bombardment. By the battle's end, only one Vironi knight still stood, a battered paladin, its armor blackened and scorched, its scion wounded and half-mad from pain. Around him lay the shattered remains of his fallen kin. He refused extraction, choosing instead to die in place, broadcasting his house's battle hymn until his power core burned out, defiant even in death. But Beta Garmon was merely a prelude to the final reckoning. As Horus advanced toward Terra itself, the Knights followed their legions into the crucible of the Siege of Terra, the very heart of the Imperium. The Knight houses that reached Terra fought in conditions never seen before. Urban combat on a planetary scale, titanic sieges that shattered continents, and the ceaseless pounding of traitor artillery that lit the skies day and night. The Scions fought alongside the Imperial Fists, the Legio Ignatum, the Blood Angels, and the Emperor's custodians themselves. It was at Terra that many houses wrote their most hallowed legends and their epitaphs. House Griffith deployed its entire lance to defend the Saturnine Wall, their knights forming an unbreakable bulwark that turned back repeated assaults by traitor Astartes and Chaos Knights. They fought not for victory, but for every hour of survival, buying time as the Emperor himself faced Horus aboard his flagship. None of Griffith's knights survived, but their stand would pass into song for generations. The Horus heresy was not a war of armies alone. It was a war of souls, a war where oaths were shattered, traditions desecrated, and ancient bloodlines extinguished in an instant. By the time the War Master was slain, entire knight houses had ceased to exist. Some, like House Divine, were annihilated completely. Others, like House Morton, were irredeemably lost to chaos. Still others limped away from the wreckage, their banners tattered but unbowed, and in the aftermath, as the Imperium licked its wounds, the surviving knight houses faced the grim reality of what had been done. The bonds of fealty, once unbreakable, would never be quite so certain again. The scars of brother against brother would echo down the ages. The knight houses had proven their strength, but the stain of treachery would haunt them forever. The heresy raged like wildfire, devouring the Imperium world by world. But there, at the Beta Garmon cluster, on the threshold of Terra itself, the fires of betrayal reached a scale that would drown the stars in blood. The Battle of Beta Garmon. A war within the war, a slaughter so vast, so catastrophic, that those who survived whispered only one name for it: Titan death. But while the Titans clashed in apocalyptic duels, beneath their towering shadows strode the Imperial Knights, and it would be here in the cauldron of Beta Garmon that the Knight Houses would experience one of their most harrowing trials. Beta Garmon was not a single world. It was a cluster, a fortified network of planets, moons, orbital bastions, and asteroid fortresses. It stood as a final shield for Terra's approach, guarding the stable warp routes through which Horus's fleets would soon strike. For the War Master to reach the Imperial Palace, Beta Garmon had to fall. Horus gathered his might. The traitor legions descended. The Dark Mechanicum answered his call, and the Knight Houses, loyal to the War Master, rode beside them, their banners blackened, their war engines defiled. But the Loyalists stood ready. From across the Imperium, houses that had sworn to the Emperor gathered to defend Beta Garmon. House Vironi from the Galactic East, House Krast from the Segmentum borders, House Cadmus, House Hawkshroud, and a dozen smaller houses deployed entire lances, knowing full well that few would return. They did not come for glory. They came to die standing. The opening salvos were apocalyptic. From orbit, the traitor fleets unleashed mass bombardments that reduced entire continents to molten slag. The air burned, the oceans boiled, great cities whose foundations had stood for millennia crumbled into vaporized ash. But orbital bombardment could not break Beta Garmon alone. The traitors needed boots on the ground, and knights were among the first to land. On the scorched plains of Beta Garmon II, the blackened banners of House Vextrix marched alongside the heretical Legio Mortis, the Death's Heads, most feared of the traitor Titans. Vextrix, once counted among the noblest of Knight Houses, had thrown its full strength behind Horus early in the heresy. Their betrayal had been absolute, and now, with engines howling, the Knights of Vextrix led the assault. The Loyalist houses met them with fury. House Krast, ever stoic and unflinching, held the high passes of the Kaldrath Ridge. Their lances maneuvered between broken terrain, outflanking traitor war machines with practiced precision. Cerastus knights danced through the battlefield like steel predators, their elongated limbs delivering sweeping blows with chain blades that sent enemy knights toppling. Krast's scions fought like warriors possessed, refusing to yield even when entire waves of traitor titans threatened to overwhelm them. Every knight that fell bought a few more meters of ground held. Every knight that stood kept the War Master's hordes one step further from Terra. But the fury of Beta Garmon was not limited to open battlefields. In the industrial hive ruins of Beta Garmon III, house-to-house combat took on a new horrifying form. The confined urban corridors, too narrow for Titans, became killing grounds for knights. Here, the agile Armiger-class scouts were deployed in unprecedented numbers, darting through streets, stalking enemies like giant hunting hounds. Thermal spears spat molten fire through shattered hab blocks. Helverin autocannons hammered traitor armor from elevated spires. Even lone free blades, knights without a house, joined the desperate fighting, seeking redemption or an honorable death. In these ruins, Loyalist and traitor knights fought at ranges so close that ion shields flared with every impact, and machine spirits howled in agony. The true horror of Beta Garmon, however, was not merely its scale. It was the culling. Within House Vextrix, even betrayal was not enough to guarantee survival. Their loyalty to Horus was questioned by their own allies, for whispers of divided loyalties spread like rot through the traitor ranks. The War Master and his Dark Mechanicum allies could not afford hesitation. Thus was born the Great Cull. Under orders from Horus's strategists, entire battalions of Vextrix Knights were placed at the forefront of suicidal assaults, not for tactical necessity, but as a test of their devotion. Those who advanced without question proved their loyalty. Those who hesitated were marked for elimination. In wave after wave, Vextrix Knights charged directly into Loyalist kill zones. Plasma fire from House Raven's entrenched positions cut them down by the dozens. The ion shields of even the most advanced knights could not withstand the saturation of macro-cannon bombardments from Loyalist support forces. By the time the fourth wave was broken, entire bloodlines within House Vextrix had been extinguished. Their sacrifice was not born of honor, but of suspicion and political purging. Throughout the cluster, the collateral damage was staggering. Entire knight keeps, once proud fortresses of nobility and tradition, were reduced to radioactive craters. On Beta Garmon 5, House Orlak made their final stand, deploying their venerable Dominus-class Castellans to hold back an entire Titan assault column. For 7 days they held the line. For 7 days they fired until their reactor cores glowed white-hot, their towering war engines shaking under the strain of continuous bombardment. In the end, as their ammunition was exhausted and their ion shields collapsed, they activated their fail-safe protocols. The final 4 Castellans of House Orlak detonated their cores in unison, unleashing a blast so powerful it annihilated a full maniple of traitor titans, wiping out Legio Vulpa war engines and collapsing the mountain range behind them. Orlak was lost, but their names were carved into the memory cores of every Loyalist knight that remained. The months dragged on. Beta Garmon became a graveyard. The ground was paved with the wreckage of war engines. Entire plateaus were coated in layers of broken ceramite and adamantium husks. Even now, in the present day, the region remains littered with the skeletal remains of fallen knights, their hulking frames half buried in the dust, frozen in final battle poses as grim monuments to the war. By the time Horus finally secured Beta Garmon, the cost had been astronomical. The Loyalist houses had been bled white, but their sacrifice had delayed Horus's march long enough for Terra to fortify its defenses. They had fulfilled their oaths. At Beta Garmon, the Night Houses learned the true price of loyalty. Not merely death, extinction. And yet, though broken, though scattered, though surrounded by the ashes of their own kin, those few who survived carried their banners to the final battle. The siege of Terra awaited, and the last Loyalist knights would stand beneath the shadow of the Emperor's palace for humanity, for honor, and for vengeance. There are betrayals that shake a battle. There are betrayals that stain a war. And then there are betrayals that scar history forever. The fall of Molech was one such betrayal. Molech was not merely another night world. It was a jewel among the stars, a world steeped in nobility, its houses ancient and proud, its palaces shining upon green hills where towering knights strode like armored gods. But beneath the pageantry and honor, Molech was far more valuable than anyone dared speak aloud. It was a world hiding a secret, one that Horus would kill to possess. In the time before the heresy, Molech had already stood apart. While many night worlds ruled themselves under loose imperial oversight, Molech was unique in its proximity to the warp gate buried deep within its crust. This portal, a stable passage to realms beyond mortal comprehension, was one of the few fragments remaining from humanity's ancient wars with the warp itself. Long before the Emperor unified Terra, he had come to Molech in secret. There, he passed through the gate and into the Immaterium, wrestling with powers that even the most loyal servants of the Mechanicum feared to name. When he returned, he carried new knowledge that would fuel his godlike mastery of the warp, his creation of the Primarchs, and his dominion over the Great Crusade. But Horus, fallen and ambitious, sought that same knowledge for himself. Moloch was no longer merely a target of war. It was a key to godhood. When word of Horus's advance reached Moloch, the houses prepared for war. House Divine stood at the heart of the planet's defense, its knights renowned for centuries of unbroken loyalty. They were aristocrats in the truest sense, proud, lavish, and steeped in the rituals of the Mechanicum and Imperium alike. Their banners flew beside those of House Moratean, House Caesarian, and the smaller vassal houses who had served under their dominion for generations. When the call came, they answered. The Loyalist defenders dug in alongside Imperial army regiments, Titan legions, and Astartes contingents sworn to the Emperor. The grand palace fortresses were transformed into war bastions, and the gleaming fields of Moloch were fortified with batteries of macro cannons, shield generators, and anti-orbital defenses. But Moloch's doom would not come from the stars above. It would rise from within. Unknown to many, the rot had already spread deep into House Divine. Even before the War Masters' rebellion, the Divine bloodline had grown decadent. Its high monarch, Lord Cyprian Divine, obsessed with the secrets buried beneath his world. His ancestors had whispered of the Warp Gate's existence for generations. Forbidden lore and unholy tomes, stolen from traitorous Mechanicum enclaves, had taught him of powers beyond the Emperor's reach. And when Horus made his offer, Lord Divine was already prepared to listen. The bargain was simple. Horus would spare Moloch from orbital devastation. In exchange, House Divine would open its gates and turn on its allies at the appointed hour. In return, Horus promised Divine something far greater than power, the chance to ascend, to walk as a god within the Empyrean. Temptation proved irresistible. Lord Divine sealed his pact in secret. But to secure his treason, Horus provided more than promises. He sent emissaries, dark envoys bearing gifts of corruption. Forbidden rituals were taught. The scions of Divine were anointed with the first blessings of the warp. The throne Mechanicum itself, once a holy relic, became a vessel through which the dark gods whispered directly into their minds. The house that had once sworn oaths of purity now bore invisible chains, pulling them inexorably toward damnation. When Horus's fleet finally arrived, Moloch's defenses sprang to life. The battle that followed was colossal. Orbital strikes lit the night sky. Traitor titans descended. The sons of Horus, word-bearers, and Death Guard poured onto the surface, supported by corrupted Skitarii and dark Mechanicum war engines. And still, the defenders held. The Knights of House Moratain charged the traitor lines, their chainswords carving swathes through corrupted infantry and demon engines alike. Loyalist titans dueled with their traitor kin, the ground shaking beneath their titanic clashes. House Divine stood alongside them, their banners flying beside the Imperial Aquila. Their betrayal came when victory seemed possible. During the third week of battle, as Imperial forces gained the upper hand, the center of the defensive line was entrusted to House Divine. Imperial army commanders moved reinforcements to the flanks, trusting their noble allies to hold the core. It was then that Lord Cyprian Divine gave the signal. In unison, House Divine turned their guns inward. Loyalist knights were caught entirely off guard. Their formation, tightly grouped to maximize ion shield overlap, offered no defense when betrayal came from within their own lines. Knight paladins unleashed their battle cannons point-blank into Loyalist engines beside them. Gallants charged into stunned allies, ramming Reaper chainswords into exposed reactor housings. Even sacristans and ground crews turned on the serfs, supporting neighboring houses, slaughtering loyal retainers within the keeps themselves. The slaughter was merciless. Entire lances of House Caesarian were wiped out in minutes. The lines collapsed. Imperial command descended into chaos. The breach was immediate and devastating. With the Loyalists broken, Horus unleashed his full force. The sons of Horus stormed through the gap, supported by towering traitor titans of Legio Mortis. Demonic war engines surged forth, their twisted forms gleaming in the fires of betrayal. The defense crumbled. The great Titan Paragon of Terra, an Imperator-class war engine that had served the Imperium for centuries, suffered catastrophic reactor overload when its plasma core was pierced by a well-placed traitor strike. The resulting explosion vaporized entire districts of Molech's capital, leaving behind a crater half a kilometer wide, the wound known thereafter as the Scar of Divine. Within hours, Molech's fate was sealed. At the heart of Molech, beneath his palace fortress, Lord Cyprian Divine descended into the warp gate with Horus himself, hoping to claim apotheosis. The traitor Primarch passed through, forging his infamous bargain with the Chaos Gods that would elevate him far beyond mortal understanding. Lord Divine, however, was denied his promised ascension. The Dark Gods had little use for mortal ambition that was no longer convenient. When he emerged from the portal, he was twisted, a malformed parody of a man, mutated by the warp energies he could not control. His once proud knight suit now bore the grotesque signs of demonhood: writhing mouths where censors once sat, clawed limbs in place of servos, its machine spirit entirely consumed by the warp. Lord Cyprian Divine was no longer a scion. He was something else entirely. Molech was lost. House Divine had damned itself, and Horus, empowered by the secrets of Molech's gate, would press onward toward Terra. But the stain of Divine's betrayal would linger for millennia. Their name was struck from imperial records, their banners burned and erased from all official heraldry. Surviving members of House Divine who did not perish in Molech's fall fled into the warp, becoming some of the earliest Chaos Knights, dread lords of war who would spread their blasphemy across the galaxy for centuries to come. For the Knight houses that remained loyal, Molech became a wound that never fully healed. It was not simply the loss of a world, it was the loss of trust. The realization that even the most ancient bloodlines could fall, that oaths, no matter how sacred, could be broken, and that in the shadow of the warp, there were no guarantees, only the terrible price of betrayal. The War Master was dead, the siege of Terra was over, but the galaxy was far from saved. Though Horus had fallen, though the Emperor sat broken upon the Golden Throne, the wounds inflicted upon the Imperium would never truly heal. Across countless star systems, traitor forces still held strongholds of corruption, warp storms boiled across the void, and entire sectors remained in the iron grip of those who had turned against the throne. The heresy was finished. But now the scouring would begin. For the Knight houses who had remained loyal through the fires of betrayal, the Great Scouring was not merely a campaign of strategic necessity. It was a crusade of vengeance, a purge of broken oaths and foul treachery that had stained the code chivalric itself. The traitors would be hunted, their banners would be torn down, their names erased, and the knights, the avenging blades of noble bloodlines, would lead the charge. The Imperium's armies surged outward in every direction. The loyalist Astartes led massive campaigns to reclaim fallen worlds. The Titan legions of Mars marched alongside towering god engines. The Mechanicus sought to purge its own ranks of dark Mechanicum heresy. But wherever the fighting was thickest, wherever treachery had taken its deepest roots, The Imperial Knights rode at the vanguard. Their purpose was clear. The time for diplomacy was long past. There would be no more oaths offered to traitor houses, no second chances for those who had betrayed their emperor. Only annihilation. House Tyrannus was among the first to answer the call. Fresh from the siege of Terra, their ranks battered but unbroken, the scions of Tyrannus launched punitive expeditions into the ruins of once proud knight worlds that had turned against the Imperium. On the planet of Carthus, they encountered the remains of House Mordral, a minor knight house that had joined Horus in his rebellion. What had once been a thriving stronghold was now a place of filth and mutation, its keeps twisted by warp energies, its scions bloated with unnatural growths. There was no negotiation, no parley. Tyrannus deployed its lances with ruthless precision, bombarding Mordral's fortress citadels from orbit before landing to finish the work. In close combat, the battle became a slaughter. The Cerastus Knights of Tyrannus danced through Mordral's corrupted knights, slicing apart their mutated frames, while thermal cannons burned through twisted armor like wax. In a single day, House Mordral was wiped from existence, its banners incinerated, its name stricken from the records of the knightly orders. Its shame was erased as if it had never been. But not all vengeance was swift. The greatest symbol of treachery remained Moloch, and the corrupted remains of House Divine. After their betrayal, Moloch had become a festered wound within Imperial space, a world tainted by warp corruption, where demon engines roamed the once beautiful plains, and the ruins of Divine's keeps stood as blackened monuments to blasphemy. For years following the siege of Terra, Imperial commanders debated the wisdom of attempting to reclaim the cursed world. The risk of warp contamination, of demonic resurgence, was high. But for the Knight houses, there was no hesitation. The betrayal of Moloch had burned too deeply. It was not just revenge, it was purification. The campaign to retake Moloch became one of the most storied vengeance crusades in Knight history. Houses Cadmus, Terran, and Borgias, among others, assembled their greatest lances for the assault. From orbit, they unleashed days of sustained bombardment, purging the surface with plasma and melta strikes. When the landing finally came, entire battalions of knights stormed the broken strongholds of House Divine. The corrupted knights of Divine, now twisted into grotesque abominations, their armor fused with organic monstrosity, met them in battle. Warp fire licked at the loyal knights as demon engines howled through the ruins. The very ground itself buckled beneath the fighting as reality bent and twisted under the lingering warp energies that saturated the planet. Night dueled night, but this time, the outcome was never in doubt. House Terran's Galleons led brutal close assault charges, crashing through the traitor lines with roaring chainswords. House Cadmus provided precise fire support, their Helverins sweeping enemy infantry and demon spawn from the field. House Borgias's Crusaders unleashed sustained bombardments that collapsed Divine's last bastions into molten rubble. The battle raged for days, but in the end Moloch was purged. House Divine was exterminated to the last scion. Their ancestral keeps were razed, their sacred vaults detonated, their banners torn down and cast into the fires. When the smoke cleared, the surviving lords of the loyalist houses gathered in silent ceremony beneath the shattered ruins of Divine's grand keep. With solemn hands, they sealed the final judgment into the knightly archives, House Divine, purged, condemned, forgotten. And so, the most infamous betrayal was finally avenged. But Moloch was only one wound among many. Across the galaxy, other fallen houses were hunted down. On the world of Phethys Majoris, House Skorath, whose scions had consorted with warp entities in secret during the heresy, were cornered in their subterranean stronghold. The lances of House Hawkshroud laid siege for weeks, driving their traitorous cousins into the tunnels like hunted beasts. There, deep beneath the mountains, the Knights of Hawkshroud extinguished their corrupted kin in brutal close-quarters combat. The underground chambers shook with every strike of Chainsword and Thunderstrike Gauntlet. In the final chamber, the last scion of Skorath, his body grotesquely fused with demon flesh, was personally executed by High Monarch Faramis of Hawkshroud, whose blade sheared through corrupted armor and flesh alike in one final, merciful blow. House Skorath's history ended that day, their keeps buried beneath rockfalls triggered by demolition charges. The tunnels collapsed, their heresy sealed forever beneath stone. And yet, vengeance did not only fall upon those who had openly turned. The scouring revealed another bitter truth, that some houses had walked a dangerous line during the heresy, offering aid to both sides, playing politics in the hope of survival, or hesitating when the call to loyalty had been sounded. For the most zealous loyalist houses, even indecision was a crime. On the world of Halvin's Reach, House Dolmath had refused to declare for either side during the heresy, attempting to stay neutral while brother slaughtered brother across the stars. When the Great Scouring reached their borders, the Imperium sent its judgment. Led by elements of House Krast and agents of the Inquisition, Dolmath's neutral stance was declared treachery by omission. Their refusal to answer the Emperor's call when Terra had bled was seen as a betrayal of their most sacred oaths. Dolmath's scions were offered only one choice: swear full fealty to Terra now, surrender all holdings, and submit to inquisitorial oversight, or be purged. The house refused. The Knights of Krast descended upon their fortresses with grim purpose. Dolmath's lances fought back with desperation, but the outcome was inevitable. Within a week, the banners of House Dolmath were pulled down and burned, their lands absorbed, their name wiped from the order of battle. As the Great Scouring pushed ever outward, the galaxy slowly shifted. Traitor knight houses that survived fled into the warp, becoming the earliest Chaos Knight warbands that would plague the Imperium for the next 10,000 years. Their names were forbidden, their banners unspoken among loyal houses, but their threat would linger forever. But for the loyalist houses, the Great Scouring forged a new identity. The pain of betrayal had been answered with fire. The wounds of Molech, Beta Garmon, and Terra had been partially healed, not by forgiveness, but by annihilation. From the ashes of the traitors, the surviving houses reforged their honor. Their lances rode again across the stars, battered, diminished, but unbroken. And as the Imperium rebuilt itself, the Knight houses took their place as ever-loyal pillars of the Emperor's shattered domain. Their motto burned brighter than ever: honor unto death, vengeance without mercy. Oathbreakers will not be spared. The flames of the Horus heresy had cooled. The Great Scouring had run its brutal course. Across the galaxy, loyal knight houses had purged their traitor kin, reforged their oaths, and returned to the grim business of defending the Imperium. But peace was not the reward for their loyalty. In the grim darkness of the galaxy, war is a constant drumbeat, and new threats emerged with every passing century. The night worlds, though tempered by betrayal and vengeance, would be tested again, and none would face that trial more courageously or more tragically than the defenders of Vorinth. Vorinth was a jewel among the stars, a lush world of rolling green plains, crystalline rivers, and vibrant blue skies. Its twin suns bathed the world in perpetual light, and its rich soil fed billions of loyal imperial citizens. At its heart stood the knightly fortresses of House Ilias and House Nero, two ancient houses bound not by blood, but by generations of mutual respect, shared honor, and intertwined oaths. Their scions had fought side by side in countless campaigns, and together they stood as twin shields over Vorinth's people. Their banners flew high above the towering bastions of Adamant Keep, whose silver spires glittered beneath the twin suns like the swords of gods. The people of Vorinth lived with the quiet certainty that their knights would forever stand against any threat. But the stars had other plans, for across the void an ancient enemy was gathering its strength. The orcs were coming. The Wa of war boss Gorzag Ironskull had swept across the nearby sectors like a green hurricane, devouring entire star systems. Dozens of worlds had fallen before his endless hordes of screaming greenskin warriors, crude war engines, and ramshackle ships. The orcs' numbers were beyond counting, and their ferocity was unmatched. Vorinth stood directly in their path. There would be no time for evacuation, no hope for reinforcements, no aid from Terra or Mars. The twin houses of Ilias and Nero faced the oncoming storm alone. The scions gathered in solemn council beneath the vaulted chambers of Adamant Keep. Lord Commander Valtor Ilias, his face lined with age but his spirit unbroken, spoke first. "We stand not for our own lives, but for those who cannot fight for themselves. Our duty is not survival, it is sacrifice." High Lady Seraphina Nero, her armor polished to a mirror sheen, nodded grimly. "Let the orcs come. They shall find no easy prey here. If we fall as knights, blades drawn, banners raised." The scions knew what was coming. They did not flinch. Preparations began immediately. Defensive lines were fortified. Orbital defense batteries were rearmed. The entire civilian population was moved into the deepest catacombs beneath Adamant Keep. The sacristans worked without pause, ensuring that every knight suit was fully operational, their machine spirits anointed, and their throne mechanicums properly sanctified. In the final days before the assault, the scions walked the Hall of Memory, where banners of their ancestors hung, each embroidered with the tales of victories long past. They paused before the banners of their forefathers, offering silent oaths to those who had come before. Their time had come. They would add one final chapter to the great saga of their houses. The orcs arrived in a fury of smoke and flame. Their crude ships punched through the atmosphere, disgorging endless waves of screaming warriors. Stompas, towering, lumbering war machines, crashed to the surface alongside mobs of Gorkanauts, Death Dreads, and ramshackle battle wagons. The skies boiled with the fires of re-entry. The ground trembled beneath the weight of their landing craft. The battle began immediately. The knights of Ilias and Nero formed their lances, riding forth from Adamant Keep in perfect formation. Rows of gallants led the charge, their chainswords roaring as they slammed into the first wave of orc trucks. Armigers flanked the enemy lines, their thermal spears carving through orc armor with searing blasts of energy. Knight Crusaders stood at the rear, unleashing punishing volleys of battle cannon fire that turned entire mobs of orc boys into charred heaps of ash. For days the knights held the plains. For days the orcs smashed against their lines like waves against a cliff. And for days the scions refused to yield. But the Wa was unrelenting. For every orc slain, 10 more seemed to arrive. The skies darkened with swarms of airborne fighter bombers, their crude rockets peppering the battlefield with random devastation. The first Stompus reached the front lines on the third day, towering monstrosities of scrap metal, crude weapons, and howling orc pilots eager to crush their knightly foes. The battles that followed were titanic. Sir Damar Ilius, piloting the venerable Vigilant Blade, met the first Stompa in single combat. The two giants clashed in a storm of metal and sparks, chainsword grinding against power claw, melta blasts cooking armor plating until it ran like wax. In a final, desperate strike, Sir Damar plunged his Reaper chainsword into the Stomper's reactor core, severing vital systems and triggering a chain reaction that engulfed both combatants in a blinding explosion. The loss was great, but the enemy was fewer. The knights fought on. By the fifth day, the orcs had reached the outer walls of Adamant Keep itself. With ammunition dwindling and knights falling one by one, the surviving scions gathered for their final council. Lord Valter Ilias, though wounded, stood tall. "We cannot hold this ground forever, but we can buy our people one final chance. We make our stand here. One last charge. We die on our feet." The remaining scions voiced their agreement, each swearing their final oaths beneath the banners of their houses. There would be no retreat, no surrender. The last charge of Vorinth was a sight spoken of in hushed reverence for centuries to come. Every remaining knight, Ilias and Nero alike, surged forth from the gates of Adamant Keep, their war horns blaring, their banners flying high against the blood-red skies. Thermal lances fired in synchronized volleys, melting through orc gargants. Gallants waded into hordes of boys, their chainswords cleaving through hundreds with each sweeping arc. Crusaders and Castellanes laid down overlapping fire fields, their Avenger Gatling cannons roaring as they shredded wave after wave of green-skinned invaders. They carved a bloody path through the heart of the orc horde, their every step an act of defiance against the impossible odds. But numbers would not be denied. The orcs swarmed the knights like a living tide. Dismembered war engines toppled, reactor cores ruptured, thunderstrike gauntlets smashed apart, chainswords shattered under relentless assault. The last knight to fall was High Lady Seraphina Nero, piloting Radiant Vow, surrounded by Stompis, Gargants, and mobs of howling orcs. She fought like a force of nature, severing power claws, vaporizing entire mobs with precision thermal strikes, and gutting a final Gargant with her last desperate charge. As her reactor approached overload, Seraphina broadcast her final words to her house. Honor holds. Vorinth endures. Moments later, Radiant Vow detonated in a brilliant sphere of plasma fire, consuming her foes in a final act of vengeance. When the smoke cleared, the orcs had won, but their victory was hollow. The knights had bled them dry. Though Vorinth's surface was scorched and its defenders fallen, the delay had bought the Imperium time to mobilize reinforcements. The orc Wah faltered in its next campaign, ultimately breaking under Imperial counteroffensives. Vorinth itself would be resettled centuries later. Its soil would be purified, its people restored. But the knight houses of Ilias and Nero were gone, their bloodlines extinguished in a blaze of final glory. Their banners, recovered from the ruins, hang now in the Hall of Eternal Vigil upon Terra itself, a silent testament to sacrifice. Their legend echoes forever in the litanies of the surviving knight houses. In defiance they stood, in death they endured. Vorinth shall not be forgotten. The orcs had been held, the traitors had been purged, but the galaxy was far from cleansed. There are enemies of flesh and iron that can be seen. Xenos invaders, traitor legions, heretic warlords. Against these, the Imperial Knights had proven themselves again and again. But the most insidious enemies are not of this realm. They come from beyond the veil, from the immaterium, where the laws of reality are twisted into mockeries of nature, and when they spill into the mortal realm, they bring devastation on a scale no blade or cannon can easily contain. It was during the 33rd millennium that the knights faced one of their greatest horrors, a warp incursion unlike any before, remembered forever as the Demon Tide. The first signs came quietly. Entire sectors fell silent. Astropathic choirs screamed in unison before their minds were consumed by madness. The warp churned and boiled across the segmentum Pacificus, swallowing the stars in an emerald storm of unreal light. Planets vanished from Imperial records overnight, their transmissions replaced with bursts of incoherent shrieks that no machine could translate. For the Imperium, it was a puzzle. For the Mechanicum, a mystery. But for the Knights, it was a summons. 5 knightly houses answered the call to arms, drawn together by both duty and desperation. Each had suffered enough to recognize that this was no mere rebellion or alien invasion. Something far worse was breaking through the veil. At their head stood one of the most legendary leaders of her age, High Queen Desmadara of House Terran. House Terran was old even by the standards of knightly dynasties. Its lances had served in the Great Crusade, stood firm during the Horus heresy, and led countless crusades since. Now, in the face of the growing warp storm, Queen Desmadara called upon her kin from across the stars. House Cadmus, known for its hunting traditions, answered first. House Raven, ever stalwart, dispatched its finest lances. House Krast, grim and unflinching, offered its heaviest war engines. And House Griffith, masters of aggressive charge tactics, pledged their banners without hesitation. They assembled on the desolate world of Godsmote, where Imperial strategists predicted the demon tide would break into real space. Their mission was clear: halt the incursion, no matter the cost. The warp breach did not arrive as a sudden wound, but as a slow, grinding fracture. First, the winds howled with voices that were not wind. The stars above twisted into impossible geometries, their light bending and folding upon itself. Then the ground itself pulsed like a living thing, ruptures opening across the rocky plains of Godsmote. And then the demons came. From ragged gashes in reality, the hosts of chaos spilled forth in numbers beyond reason. Legions of shrieking bloodletters, their blades glowing with unnatural heat, charged across the fields. Towering great unclean ones shambled forward, bloated with disease and rot. Flapping monstrosities of Khorne, Zintish, Slanesh, and Nurgle swooped down from the skies, gibbering their eternal hunger. It was not an army, it was an endless tide. The knights stood ready. Queen Desmadara had chosen her ground carefully. Her armigers had harried the demon hosts for days, drawing them into the central valley where narrow passes funneled the enemy into kill zones. At her command, 24 knight castellans unleashed the first volley from the surrounding highlands. Shieldbreaker missiles streaked through the corrupted skies. Plasma decimators screamed with power as arcs of searing light carved through the demon lines. The first ranks of bloodletters disintegrated under the barrage. Winged horrors were vaporized mid-flight. Nurgle's plague bearers melted beneath the cleansing heat. But the demon tide was inexhaustible. For every score annihilated, more poured forth from the warp rifts. As the enemy closed, the knights charged. 600 Questoris-class knights advanced in unison, a wall of walking gods striding forward beneath banners that snapped in the supernatural winds. Their ion shields flared as waves of warp energy pounded them from all sides. At their head rode Queen Desmadara herself, piloting the towering luminous judgment, its blue and gold heraldry gleaming under the light of unnatural stars. By oath, by blood, by the throne Mechanicum, forward, she roared. The knights smashed into the demon host like a thunderclap. Chains wards the size of buildings tore through demon flesh. Thermal cannons disintegrated greater demons where they stood. Thunderstrike gauntlets crushed horrors of the warp into pulp beneath adamantium fists. The battle became a swirling maelstrom of fire, steel, and unholy corruption. The knights were not unchallenged. As the melee raged, the greater champions of chaos arrived. A towering lord of change, its wings trailing unnatural flame, descended from the warp, Its screeching chants twisted the minds of mortal soldiers who fought alongside the knights. Spells of ruinous energy cracked across the battlefield. Sir Halric of House Raven faced the creature directly. His paladin-class knight advanced under constant bombardment, ion shield flickering dangerously. With every step, psychic blasts hammered his armor, rupturing plating and scorching the cockpit. Yet Halric pressed on. At point-blank range, his battle cannon fired one final shell, punching through the demon's avian skull and detonating its core in a burst of unreality. The Lord of Change evaporated with a scream that echoed for hours, but Halric's knight staggered and collapsed, its pilot slain by psychic backlash. Another martyr, another hero. The most terrible of the foes, however, had yet to appear. From the largest rift, a colossal form emerged, a great unclean one of Nurgle, whose name would forever be burned into the memories of House Terran. Bolithrax, the bloated king. This mountain of diseased flesh towered above even the tallest knights, its body a shifting mass of sores, teeth, and tentacles. Each step it took poisoned the ground, spawning rivers of pus that corroded even adamantium. Bolithrax bellowed a challenge, its voice like a ruptured organ pipe. Lords of Tin, children of weakling flesh, I am the feast eternal. Queen Desmadara accepted. With her exalted court, a formation of elite knights representing each gathered house, she led the final charge. The battle with Bolithrax was titanic. Dozens of knights engaged the demon in coordinated strikes. Thunder coil harpoons anchored its bloated frame, allowing gallants and crusaders to swarm its flanks. Bolithrax struck back with ruinous strength, its flailing limbs crushing knights like insects. One by one, the knights fell, but their sacrifice bought the opening. Queen Desmadara, with luminous judgment ablaze, charged directly into Bolithrax's chest. Her chainsword plunged into corrupted flesh, cutting through organs that had no mortal analog. As the demon howled, her thermal cannon discharged at point-blank range, burning a path into its monstrous heart. With a scream that tore the sky, Bolithrax was banished back into the warp, its swollen body collapsing into oily mist. The tide was broken. In the aftermath, the fields of Godsmote were silent. Of the 600 knights who had answered Queen Desmadara's call, fewer than 200 remained. The exalted court was gone, every scion fallen in the final battle. But the breach had been sealed. The demon tide had been broken, not by titans, not by space marines, but by the indomitable courage of the night houses, by noble scions who held their oaths even against the nightmares of unreality itself. For House Terran, the price was incalculable. But Queen Desmadara's name would become legend. Her banners would be carried into every future campaign as a symbol of defiance against the horrors of the warp. And though the demon tide would one day return, though Bolithrax would hunger once more, the Knights of Godsmote had shown that no matter how deep the darkness, honor can endure. We do not yield to the warp, Desmadara's final words declared. We do not break before the tide. We ride and we stand until the last breath is drawn. For thousands of years after the fires of the Horus heresy cooled, the Imperium endured, bleeding, battered, but unbroken. The night houses stood as its iron pillars, defending countless worlds, purging Xeno's threats, and holding the line against chaos incursions. But even in the wake of so much betrayal, even after the purges of the Great Scouring, not all oaths held forever. There are betrayals that come in the heat of war, and then there are betrayals that fester in secret, quiet cancers that rot through oaths like acid, unnoticed until it is too late. Such was the fate of House Draken. In the latter years of M37, the Imperium's slow decline was in full motion. Warp storms raged unpredictably. Isolated sectors grew increasingly autonomous. The Administratum's vast bureaucracy choked under its own weight. Even the mighty Adeptus Mechanicus struggled to maintain ancient technologies, whose mysteries had long since passed beyond their full understanding. In the shadows of this slow decay, the Occlusiad sector, deep within Segmentum Obscurus, had become a theater of strange heretical uprisings. A rogue tech priest overlord, calling himself the Blind King, declared dominion over entire systems, establishing forbidden manufactoria and secret pacts with blasphemous warp entities. The Imperium launched full-scale campaigns to crush the heretics' rebellion. Astartes chapters, Mechanicus fleets, and Titan legions descended upon his dominion. But then came the most unexpected blow. Without warning, House Draken, a Night House long thought steadfast, defected. House Draken's betrayal sent shockwaves through the Imperium's command hierarchy. For centuries, they had served loyally as Questor Mechanicus, their banners flying alongside the forge world of Polix Magna. They had purged Tyranid vanguard fleets, broken orc sieges, and even stood in defense of the Imperial worlds bordering the Eye of Terror itself. But now, without warning or demand, they had turned. The first sign was a treacherous ambush. As a loyalist relief fleet approached the embattled system of Caradon, they encountered what they believed were Dracon's knights, sent ahead to secure a beachhead. But when the fleet's escorts lowered their void shields to establish contact, the Draken lances opened fire. Orbital defense batteries, crewed by corrupted sacristans loyal to Draken's new masters, erupted with mass driver fire. Dozens of Imperial transports were vaporized in the opening salvo. The surviving vessels barely escaped the slaughter. The betrayal was total. Drakon had not merely switched sides. They had abandoned the Imperium entirely, pledging themselves to the rogue Mechanicum warlord. But it was more than politics. Behind their treachery lay whispers of something deeper, a corruption not of allegiance but of faith. The Blind King had promised Drakon forbidden knowledge, lost STC data, unorthodox machine spirit rights, and the keys to unlocking their failing throne mechanicums. Centuries of attrition had left Dracon's suits increasingly difficult to maintain, with their sacristans struggling to preserve the ancient systems. The offer of restored technology had been irresistible. In secret, Dracon's leadership accepted his gifts. But with that knowledge came hidden price, access to warped machine spirits tainted by the warp, to demon-forged circuitry, to dark technologies that spoke with hungry voices. As their knights absorbed these forbidden augmetics, the line between man, machine, and demon grew dangerously thin. The noble scions who had once knelt before the Emperor now bowed before darker gods. The defection of Drakon gave the Blind King a terrifying new weapon. No longer limited to Skitarii legions and dark mechanicum constructs, his armies now boasted towering knight suits bristling with corrupted technology, war engines that combined the destructive power of the mechanicum with the savage flexibility of knights. Where once House Draken's banners had flown as shields for humanity, they now led the charge against Imperial worlds. Their knights bore new colors, crimson-black plating etched with sigils that pulsed with unnatural light, their once proud crests twisted into leering demonic mockeries. Cables of living metal writhed across their hulls. The throne mechanicums inside had become unholy symbiotes, binding pilot and demon in one twisted consciousness. Loyalist defenders called them Oathbreakers, a name that would become legend. The war spiraled into a brutal grinding stalemate. On the forge moon of Seraphis, loyalist knights from House Cadmus clashed with Dracon's corrupted lances in a nightmarish battle beneath burning red skies. The The ground trembled beneath their duels as chainswords met in titanic arcs, ion shields shattered under demon-forged plasma blasts, and towering war engines collapsed into molten ruin. But the most horrifying duel came when Lord Arvik of Cadmus faced his own cousin, Scion Vedran Drakon, upon the Ashen Flats. Their knights met beneath the shattered spires of a Mechanicum ruin. Arvik's Cerastus Lancer lunged with its shock lance, driving through Vedran's corrupted paladin, but not before the Oathbreaker's Reaper Chainsword sheared through Arvik's leg actuator. Both knights toppled, their machine spirits screaming in agony as their pilots continued fighting within their burning shells. Neither survived. Their duel became a symbol of the tragedy unfolding. Brother against brother, blood against blood. The Occlusive War dragged on for years. Despite repeated assaults, the Imperium struggled to fully break the Blind King's power. His strongholds were fortified by heretic ingenuity, and Drakon's traitor knights fought with horrifying resilience. It was not until the intervention of the Iron Hands Space Marines that the tide turned. The cold, unyielding logic of the Iron Hands viewed Drakon's corruption with singular hatred. To them, the Oathbreakers represented not only betrayal, but the ultimate perversion of their shared mechanized creed. In coordinated strikes, Iron Hands strike cruisers isolated Drakon's fleet elements, while heavy mechanized ground forces landed precision assaults on their fortresses. On the moon of Oros, a full lance of Drakon's corrupted knights was trapped in a null field web designed by the Iron Fathers, disabling their warp-forged enhancements. The result was systematic execution. One by one, the Oathbreaker Knights were brought down by concentrated fire from Land Raider squadrons and the calculated blows of Contemptor dreadnoughts. And yet, even as defeat closed around them, House Draken did not fall like their predecessors at Moloch. Rather than face extermination, the surviving elements of Draken's corrupted leadership made a final gambit. They abandoned their worlds entirely, fleeing into the warp, seeking refuge among the growing number of chaos-aligned knight warbands that haunted the Eye of Terror and beyond. Their strongholds were demolished, their worlds cleansed by fire, their name erased from Imperial records. But House Draken, or what remained of it, would not vanish completely. In the centuries that followed, rumors spread of Draken warbands appearing alongside Chaos, incursions across the Segmentum Obscurus. Their banners, though forbidden, were still recognized by those few survivors who remembered the Occlusive War. Their knights grew increasingly inhuman, fused with demon-forged engines, their throne mechanicums now fully possessed by the entities they once sought to control. They became a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of the loyalist houses. Even those who endure for millennia may fall. Even the proudest house may rot from within. Oaths mean nothing to the warp. The legacy of House Drakon was not one of defeat. It was one of damnation. And their heresy would echo through the Imperium for ages to come. There is no sanctuary for traitors in the Imperium. No corner of the galaxy is distant enough. No darkness is deep enough. In the wake of House Drakon's fall, the Imperium launched a campaign not of war, but of extermination. The Oathbreakers had fled into the warp, joining the ranks of the twisted Chaos Knights that prowled the Eye of Terror and the roiling warp-touched regions known as the Maelstrom and the Great Rift. But the Knights of the Imperium do not forgive, and they do not forget. Justice was coming. Long after the final battles of the Occlusive War had faded into distant memory for most of the Imperium, the surviving knight houses kept a careful record of the traitors who had escaped into the shadows. Their scribes maintained detailed genealogies, logs of bloodlines, ancient heraldry, and pilot lineage. Names that had been forbidden to speak were recorded in silence for one purpose alone: retribution. Among these houses, none burned hotter with the desire for vengeance than House Cadmus, and House Crost. Both had suffered deeply during Dracon's betrayal. Both had buried countless scions whose blood now demanded reckoning. In the hidden halls beneath their great fortresses, their exalted courts gathered in secret to plan a campaign few others in the Imperium would dare attempt. They would hunt the traitor knights, not as soldiers, but as executioners. The plan became known within their circles as the Shadow Hunts, an operation that would span decades, if not centuries. The goal was not merely to engage Chaos Knight warbands in open battle, but to hunt, isolate, and destroy them one lance at a time, wherever they emerged in real space. Each hunt was carefully coordinated with the Ordo Malleus of the Inquisition, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and even select chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. Together, they formed a covert alliance bound by one cause, purging the stain of the Oathbreakers forever. The opening strikes would take them to the edge of the Eye of Terror itself, into regions where few Imperial forces dared operate for long. The first target was a splinter warband known as the Iron Maw, composed of former Draken scions who had fled into the Maelstrom. The Iron Maw had plagued Imperial shipping lanes and isolated colonies for over 70 years, raiding with impunity and slaughtering planetary populations as offerings to the ruinous powers. The Knights of House Crost tracked them to the dead world of Vraxior 7, a desolate wasteland consumed by toxic storms. Crost deployed a full lance of Cerastus Knights, supported by Mechanicus kill servitors and Death Watch strike teams who landed ahead of the main force to reconnoiter the corrupted wastelands. The Oathbreakers, confident in their warp-forged gifts, met the challenge head-on. The battle was a masterclass of night warfare. The Iron Maw's twisted knights charged with unholy speed, their war engines bristling with demon-wrought enhancements, possessed targeting arrays, biomechanical limbs, and weapons that screamed with unnatural hunger. But House Crost's discipline and precision were unbreakable. Sir Marvick Crost, piloting his Knight Castellan Vigilant Fury, served as the anchor of their formation. With unwavering fire discipline, his Volcano Lance blasted apart the lead Oathbreaker, rupturing its reactor in a burst of violet flames. The Cerastus Lancers of his flanks engaged the corrupted knights at full gallop, piercing armor joints and slicing through exposed warp flesh. When the battle was finished, none of the Iron Maw remained. Their wreckage was burned, their corrupted thrones dismantled, and their names stricken. The first justice had been delivered. The shadow hunts continued, from the warp-tainted gas giant of Moros V to the burning skies of Zalath Prime. The knights tracked their former kin across worlds the Imperium had abandoned as lost. The pattern of their strikes was cold, methodical, and remorseless. On Zalath Prime, House Cadmus faced a warband calling themselves the Eben Sons, a cabal of Chaos Knights who had fused their throne's mechanicum with bound demon entities. These abominations spoke with many voices, their pilots long since merged with their twisted machine spirits into monstrous hybrids. The Ebon Sons' leader, once known as Scion Valric Dracon, was now little more than a bloated mass of flesh and wires seated deep inside his towering Night Desecrator. It was here that the hunts nearly broke. The Ebon Sons laid ambushes for the Cadmus Lances, luring them into warp-distorted valleys where psychic storms disrupted targeting systems and servo controls. One by one, Cadmus Knights fell beneath cursed chainglaves and warp fire, but then came Lady Selene Cadmus, leading her personal knight, Sovereign of Dawn, into the heart of the trap. Driving her steed through unnatural storms, her ion shield overloading, she engaged Valric directly in single combat. Their duel lasted for hours amidst lightning storms and falling debris. In the end, it was Selene who prevailed, driving her chainsword through Valric's reactor, releasing a final blast of energy that tore the entire valley into a collapsing crater. Her body was never recovered, but her final victory became immortalized within House Cadmus's halls. The Ebon suns were extinguished. With each hunt, the ranks of the Oathbreakers thinned. Their once mighty splinter warbands were reduced to desperate raiders, scattered across warp-touched territories, hiding in ancient derelicts or allying with minor chaos warlords. Some began turning on each other, their sanity unraveling after years of exile. The warp is no safe haven for traitors, even those who serve its foul powers. But the knights continued to hunt them, even as centuries passed. The final chapter of the Shadow Hunts came with the destruction of the Coven of 13 Chains, the last surviving direct remnants of House Draken's bloodline. The Coven operated from a mobile space fortress drifting at the edge of the Maelstrom, a massive warp-shrouded construct housing the last of Draken's corrupted thrones. Their pilots, long since merged with demon symbiotes that whispered in tongues only they understood. This time, the Knights of Houses Krast, Cadmus, and Raven struck together, aided by the full might of the Ordo Malleus. Grey Knights teleported into the fortress's heart, purging its shrines and demon forges. Meanwhile, the Knights breached its armored hull, cutting through its defenders with a wrath fueled by centuries of vengeance. In the final moments, the last of Draken's corrupted scions attempted to open a warp rift large enough to swallow the entire battlefield, a last desperate act of defiance. But the combined firepower of the Knights, the iron discipline of the Grey Knights, and the precise exorcisms of the Ordo Malleus shattered the ritual mid-sequence. The fortress ruptured, imploding into the warp. The last known scions of House Drakon were gone. The Shadow Hunts ended. Their mission, begun as a whispered oath across exalted courts, had been fulfilled. But the price had been high. Entire knight lances had been lost, bloodlines had thinned, centuries of war had left the surviving scions hardened, their eyes always watching for the next whisper of corruption. In their great halls, new banners were raised, not for new conquests, but for the completion of old debts. At the Hall of Remembrance upon Polix Magna, the names of every fallen knight who participated in the Shadow Hunts were inscribed upon the Oathstone of Wrath, a towering black monolith that still stands today. Upon it is written the final vow: oaths once broken may never be restored, but let no betrayal go unpunished. The Imperium, vast and decaying, has always faced countless threats: heretics, demons, and Xenos, swarms that devour entire sectors. But few adversaries test the endurance of the Night Houses more than the Orcs. They are the perfect antithesis to Imperial order, a green flood of instinctive violence and crude engineering. And in M41, as the galaxy teetered ever closer to collapse, a new Orc threat would rise, one that would come to be known as the War of Beasts. It was not a single campaign, it was not a single system. It was an avalanche of war, energy so vast that it shook sectors from Segmentum Solar to the edges of the Great Rift, and the Knights would once again be called to hold the line. The war's origin lay in the rise of one Orc warlord, Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, the self-proclaimed prophet of Gork and Mork. Under Gazkul's banner, smaller Orc empires merged into one roiling planetary scale, War, drawn by the psychic pull of his booming proclamations. Orc warbands from hundreds of worlds abandoned their petty conflicts to join him, answering an instinctual call that not even the Orcs themselves fully understood. Entire systems fell in days. Imperial outposts were overrun before distress signals could be sent. Navy fleets were shattered by waves of crude but overwhelming Orc spacecraft, their hulking asteroid fortresses, bristling with macro cannons and void shields held together by little more than scrap and fury. Wherever Gazkul's "Wow!" advanced, the call went out for every knight world to prepare for war. On the world of Haven's Gate, one of the earliest casualties of the Orc expansion, the knight houses of House Cerberon and House Griffith prepared their last stand. Haven's Gate was a fortress world, a defensive keystone that shielded the core-ward sectors from the growing Wah. If it fell, entire supply lines to Segmentum Solar would be exposed. The skies above Haven's Gate darkened as Orc rocks and Kill cruisers began their descent, raining green-skinned warriors upon the surface in unrelenting waves. For House Cerberon, led by Lord Marshal Drennick Cerberon, retreat was never considered. The Emperor does not require survivors, he requires defenders. The opening days of the assault saw the knights deploy in full strength. Cerberon's paladins and crusaders formed towering firing lines, systematically eradicating Orc battle wagons, Stompas and Gargants, as they crossed the broken plains. The skies were streaked with contrails from Armiger Helverins, whose twin autocannons raked fighter bombers from the air before they could strafe the bastions. But the Orcs were limitless. The more that died, the more that arrived. Their crude mech boys worked day and night, assembling Gargants from wreckage directly on the battlefield. Each new war machine was larger, cruder, and deadlier than the last. By the third week of battle, the Orcs had constructed a mega Gargant, a towering multi-layered monstrosity bristling with macro cannons, towering shooter towers, and power claws large enough to crush baneblades like toys. Lord Marshal Drennick Cerberon knew that if the mega Gargant reached Haven's Gate's fortress walls, nothing would stop it. He issued the order, full night charge. The last charge of Haven's Gate was one of the most savage night assaults of the Millennium. Hundreds of Cerastus knights broke formation and stormed across the open plains, their chainswords roaring as they closed on the Orc monstrosity. Armiger warglaves darted between Stompas, cutting through armor with their thermal lances. Knight gallants threw themselves directly at the Mega Gargant's feet, hacking into its leg actuators to cripple its movement. The Mega Gargant's guns fired indiscriminately, vaporizing dozens of knights in its erratic fury. Its crude void shields flickered under the punishing assault, but slowly, piece by piece, the shields buckled and failed. The killing blow came from Sir Jorvan of House Griffoth, piloting the mighty Knight Valiant Sovereign Pyre. With its twin conflagration cannons blazing, Jorvan charged directly beneath the Mega Gargant, blasting its vulnerable undercarriage until molten metal poured like rain from ruptured fuel tanks. When the fuel reserves detonated, the explosion shattered a full square kilometer of battlefield, tearing the Mega Gargant apart in a mushrooming blast of fire, smoke, and burning Orc bodies. The surviving knights of Cerberon and Griffoth emerged bloodied but victorious, for now. But Haven's Gate was only the beginning. The War of Beasts spread like wildfire. Every sector, every forge world, every imperial stronghold became a target. Entire night houses were summoned to reinforce war zones already choked with wreckage and bodies. On the industrial world of Borak's Anvil, House Tyrannus faced Orc Gargant battalions in the shadow of the planet's massive manufactorum towers. Unlike Haven's Gate, Borak's battlefields offered no open plains. The fighting became an urban grinder, with knights navigating crumbling cities where Orc Lutus had fortified entire hive blocks with crude barricades and looted weapons. In the twisting alleys of Borak's hive ruins, Armiger Helveron became vital. nimble enough to hunt orc mech boys hiding in the ruins, while larger Questoris knights engaged orc walkers in brutal close-quarter duels. Circalin Tyrannus, piloting the ancient Knight Preceptor Iron Herald, led search and destroy patrols through the Hive stacks, personally executing dozens of mech-boy workshops that had been churning out new Gargant blueprints stolen from the Mechanicum. Even as worlds were won, more fell. The War of Beasts dragged into a grinding stalemate that tested the very limits of Imperial industry. Night engines required constant repair, rare materials, and sacristan expertise that was stretched thin across thousands of fronts. Forge worlds struggled to keep up with demand. Machine spirits grew temperamental after endless cycles of combat and hasty field repairs. Thrones, Mechanicum, began to show signs of strain as scions faced ceaseless deployments, sometimes fighting for years without ever leaving their cockpits. The strain broke some. There were knights whose pilots descended into battle madness, their minds fusing ever closer with their thrones, blurring the line between man and machine. Others, haunted by endless visions of fallen comrades, found solace only in ever greater feats of destruction. The War of Beasts did not simply test the resilience of the Imperium's armies, it tested their very souls. The war reached its crescendo at the siege of Brakthros. Gaskul's Wa had finally reached a major Imperial fortress world of strategic importance. Brakthros Prime, gateway to Segmentum Solar's southern shipping lanes. Here, the largest night deployment since the Great Scouring was assembled. Houses Raven, Krast, Griffith, Cadmus, and Terran, along with dozens of smaller houses, gathered thousands of knights for a massed counteroffensive against the largest orc Gargant force ever seen. The battlefield was apocalyptic. Hundreds of orc Gargants advanced in formation, crude titans of metal, steam, and violence, matched by Imperial titans and knights in a war of attrition that shook entire tectonic plates. In the center of the slaughter, knights dueled orc war engines with desperate ferocity. Knight lancers pierced through Mega Gargant armor. Knight Valiants grappled Stompus directly, their conflagration cannons igniting fuel tanks until towering beasts collapsed in flaming ruin. The Knights of House Raven used precision coordination, targeting structural weaknesses mapped by their Mechanicus allies. Victory was not won in a single battle, but in countless blood-soaked duels fought across weeks of ceaseless combat. In the end, the Wa fractured. Gazkul would escape to fight another day, but the War of Beasts for now was blunted. The War of Beasts left entire night houses on the edge of extinction, but it also forged new heroes, new traditions, and new bonds of honor between houses who had bled together. For the night houses, it was a brutal reminder. The galaxy may change its enemies, but it never changes its price. Blood, steel, sacrifice, and still they endure. The beasts rise endlessly. We rise to meet them. In the great halls of the night houses, beneath towering banners that stretch back millennia, every scion is taught the sacred weight of his name, of house, of bloodline, of duty. The house is everything. Without house, there is no identity. Without house, there is no purpose. And yet, scattered across the war-torn galaxy, there walk knights who bear no banner, claim no family, and serve no lord. They are the free blades, oathless, exiled, cursed, or worse, haunted. Their stories are many, their shame is varied, their tragedy is universal. Not all free blades are traitors, not all are villains. Some are victims of circumstance so brutal that even the Emperor himself might offer only silence in response. When a night world falls, whether to Xenos invasion, warp incursion, or civil war, often there are survivors. A single scion, ripped from his house by the death of his world, may find himself adrift. His knight suit remains his only companion, his only home, his only anchor to a shattered identity. These are the wanderers, free blades who carry the dead banners of extinct houses upon their hulls, their armor often repainted in personal heraldry that bears faint echoes of lost colors. They wander the Imperium as mercenaries, honor duelists, or lone crusaders, taking contracts from rogue traders, imperial governors, or inquisitors. Some do so to survive, others to find a death worthy of the oaths they once served. Then there are the exiles, those driven from their houses for crimes of shame, failure, or political betrayal that did not quite reach the level of full treason. Sometimes the crime is cowardice, a scion who breaks formation in battle, causing the deaths of his brothers, may be spared execution, but not spared exile. Other times the crime is one of forbidden love or political miscalculation within the complex inter-house alliances that bind the nobility. A marriage deemed dishonorable, a slight against a high monarch, or an unsanctioned blood feud may see a scion cast out, his name stricken from the house records. Exiles often repaint their armor in black and gray, colors of mourning signifying their severed ties. Some scavenge personal heraldry, adopting symbols of penance, a broken sword, a weeping eye, a bleeding heart. They fight for redemption, though few ever find it. But there is a darker path that leads to free bladehood. The broken. These are scions whose minds have begun to fracture beneath the weight of their throne's mechanicum. Every knight bears the echoes of those who sat the throne before. Ancestral imprints that offer guidance, but can also slowly unmoor a weak or unstable mind. Over years, especially after traumatic campaigns or long deployments, some scions lose their grip on reality. Voices that once whispered become commands. Memories of ancestors blend with hallucinations. The scion no longer distinguishes his own will from the echoing choir inside the machine. When a broken scion begins issuing orders, his house cannot justify or violates the code chivalric through erratic behavior, his high monarch may quietly send him away, not executed, but banished. Such knights are declared free blades, with the unspoken hope that death on some distant battlefield will claim them before full madness takes hold. It is whispered that many free blades are but a step away from joining the fallen, knights who slip into the worship of chaos, their fractured minds ripe for possession by demonic entities that promise clarity amidst the storm. The Imperium does not officially recognize free blades as full vassals of the Imperium, and yet, in the practical realities of endless war, they are tolerated, even welcomed, by desperate commanders who value the might of a knight suit, regardless of its bearer's history. There are records of entire Imperial campaigns turned by the arrival of a single free blade. During the siege of Damaris Ultima, a hive world beset by tyranid genestealer cults, the arrival of a free blade known only as the Ashen Reckoner allowed the defenders to survive. Piloting a heavily modified Knight Crusader with scavenged weaponry, the Ashen Reckoner waded through waves of Xenos hybrids, his battle cannon pounding the cult's central breeding nests into ruin. When the battle was won, he departed without a word, leaving behind only a battlefield strewn with broken tyranid remains. His origins were never confirmed. Some whispered he was the last survivor of a fallen house, destroyed during an earlier Hive Fleet incursion. Others claimed he was an exile whose name had been stricken even from Mechanicum records. To the grateful citizens of Damaris Ultima, it mattered little. Not all free blades operate alone. Some have gathered into loose brotherhoods, informal conclaves of exiles who fight together, bound by mutual survival rather than loyalty to a banner. One such group, known as the Verdant Fist, gained infamy during the Chaos incursions in the Agrath system. Comprised of nearly a dozen Freeblade Knights, the Verdant Fist served as mercenaries for Astra Militarum commanders, launching precise counterattacks against Chaos warbands where regular forces had collapsed. Their leader, Sir Valric the Forsaken, was once a scion of House Morton before his house was absorbed by political rivals during a brutal succession war. Rather than serve under the usurpers, Valric led his followers into exile, carving out their own destiny. Despite their skill, their existence remains uncomfortable for the wider knightly orders. Many houses regard such brotherhoods with suspicion, for where free blades gather, so too do opportunities for corruption. The Mechanicum, too, watches the free blades warily. To the tech priests of Mars, free blades are often viewed as unstable variables, custodians of precious knight suits that operate outside the careful oversight of Forge Worlds and Sacristan orders. Some free blades, unable to maintain their war engines alone, strike dangerous bargains with fringe Mechanicus cults, trading secrets and relics in exchange for repairs or forbidden upgrades. There have been incidents where free blades returned from unknown forges, bearing modifications that defy Mechanicum doctrine. Experimental plasma cores, warp reactive shielding, or unregistered AI-enhanced targeting arrays. Such deviations are carefully noted. The Ordo Reductor maintains entire vaults cataloging suspected Freeblade heresies. But for all their tragedy, for all their danger, Freeblades remain a paradoxical symbol within the Imperium. They are the living embodiment of the knightly spirit, stripped of politics, hierarchy, and house rivalries. They stand as lone champions on battlefields where entire regiments have been lost. On the Forge world of Veltharn's Maw, during a desperate Skitarii defense against Necron tomb legions, it was the Freeblade Dame Solara of the Last Star who broke the Necron line by engaging their Triarch Stalker engines in personal combat. Her final charge shattered the Necron formation, allowing Skitarii reinforcements to push forward and reclaim the Manufactorum cores. When the smoke cleared, her shattered knight stood still, its reactor dead, its pilot lifeless within. Her name, though unattached to any living house, was recorded in the Mechanicus archives as a martyr. In the end, the Freeblades walk a lonely road. They are warriors without banners, oaths, or lords. Some seek death, some seek redemption, some seek only to fight, because battle is all they have left. And though the great houses may whisper of their shame, when war comes and the walls crumble, none refuse the Freeblades' aid. For in the darkest hours, even the lost can still wield honor. No banner but battle, no house but war, no fate but steel. The knight houses have always depended upon their symbiotic bond with the Adeptus Mechanicus. Without the sacristans, without the forges of Mars and its countless forge worlds, the knight suits, ancient relics of the dark age of technology, would grind to ruin. Their secrets are too complex for mortal hands alone. Their thrones Mechanicum, too ancient to repair without the guidance of the cult, Mechanicus, and its endless liturgies. But such dependence comes at a cost. For in the shadows of the machine god's domain, there are tech priests who serve not the Omnissiah, but darker masters, the Dark Mechanicum. And over millennia, they have quietly extended their grip toward the night houses, offering forbidden knowledge, forbidden strength, and forbidden damnation. The seeds of this corruption were first planted during the Horus heresy, when many Forge worlds turned against the Emperor and pledged themselves to Horus and the ruinous powers. Even after the traitors were driven into exile, the Dark Mechanicum did not die. It retreated into the Eye of Terror, into the Maelstrom, into the hidden places where reality itself bends. There, it thrived. Unbound by the strictures of the cult Mechanicus, free to experiment with the unspeakable, The heretic magi of the Dark Mechanicum pushed the limits of technology far beyond what the Adeptus Mechanicus would dare attempt. Warp reactive engines, demon-bound circuitry, living machine spirits that no longer merely whisper, but hunger. They became the secret forges of chaos, and over time they began to reach outward once more. The night houses were vulnerable. For all their might, for all their honor, even the greatest houses suffer the grinding weight of attrition. A plasma core that cannot be replaced. A throne mechanicum whose machine spirit is failing. A generation of scions with fewer heirs. A lance lost to battle with no way to recover its priceless suit. These losses accumulate like fractures in a great wall, invisible at first, but deadly over centuries. In these desperate moments when the Mechanicum of Mars could not or would not provide, the whispers came. The Dark Mechanicum sent its emissaries, carefully, indirectly, through rogue traders, forbidden databanks, corrupted sacristans, and intercepted supply convoys. They offered solutions, replacement parts for reactor cores no Forge world could replicate. Restoration of Thrones Mechanicum believed beyond repair. Reactivation of night suits long abandoned in vaults. The price? Secrecy, compliance, and gradual submission. It began, as it always does, with necessity. On the night world of Vorthax, House Barathrum faced the slow extinction of its sacred war engines. Their Thrones Mechanicum had grown erratic, their machine spirits cold and unresponsive. Appeals to Mars brought only delay and the cold refusal of administratum bureaucracy. Desperation turned to pragmatism. A new supplier appeared, offering unofficial assistance. Components arrived that worked too well. Thrones once considered permanently dormant sprang back to life. Entire lances of knights were reactivated. At first, the scions celebrated. Then the whispers began. The Thrones Mechanicum no longer merely guided, they commanded. Dreams became filled with voices that did not belong to ancestral echoes. Sudden surges of violence began to afflict younger scions in battle as the thrones pushed their pilots toward bloodlust and excess. Within 2 decades, House Barathrum was no longer a night house. It was a warband of demon-fused night abominations. Their armor grew warped and organic, their icons subtly shifting into 8-pointed stars and writhing symbols of the warp. The sacristans who tended them were no longer tech priests, but warped cultists, their chants directed not to the machine god, but to darker lords. When the Inquisition finally discovered the full extent of Barathrum's corruption, it was too late. The world of Vorthax was reduced to ash under Exterminatus decree. But House Barathrum was not an isolated incident. Similar patterns repeated elsewhere, sometimes slowly, sometimes violently. The Dark Mechanicum's emissaries learned to tailor their offers. For the prideful houses, they offered superiority, Forbidden S, TC blueprints, Lost Knight variants, unbreakable armor. For the desperate houses, they offered salvation, spare parts, full reactor replacements, restored thrones. For the ambitious, they offered dominance, new weaponry that could elevate a minor house above its rivals, allowing them to challenge even the greatest exalted courts. Some houses resisted, some fell. Many never realized how deeply the poison had entered their blood. The Adeptus Mechanicus watched this growing corruption with quiet dread. Though they spoke little of it publicly, secret divisions within the Mechanicum were formed to monitor and suppress heretical contamination among night houses. The Ordo Reductor and Ordo Cybernetica, normally tasked with hunting rogue AI and lost technology, now extended their mandate to include night worlds suspected of falling under the Dark Mechanicum's sway. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus worked in tandem with these Mechanicus factions, dispatching kill teams, psyker assassins, and, when necessary, full Titan maniples to confront suspected heretical night houses. The purges were brutal, the secrecy absolute. Entire households vanished from Imperial records, their names reduced to unspoken footnotes in the archives of Mars and Terra. Yet, even with the Mechanicus vigilance, the Dark Mechanicum adapted. Their greatest advantage lay not in frontal conquest, but in patience. The Throne's Mechanicum themselves became their most effective tools. In the dark age of technology, these neural interfaces had been miracles, able to store echoes of Scion consciousness and guide future generations. But once corrupted, those echoes became twisted. A Scion might enter a throne bearing the voice of a noble ancestor, only to hear, over time, new voices whispering in languages never spoken by any mortal Scion. The corruption was insidious. A pilot might still obey the code chivalric, still believe himself loyal, even as the throne gradually reshaped his desires, blurring the line between knight and demon, tradition and blasphemy. Such knights became seeded blades, sleeper agents of the Dark Mechanicum, operating within loyalist houses, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true allegiance. The full extent of the Dark Mechanicum's grip remains unknown, even to the Inquisition. Some free blades, whose houses were purged for reasons lost to history, may carry these tainted thrones even now. Some houses that stand today may already harbor corruption so subtle that it will not manifest for generations. The Dark Mechanicum is patient. The warp is eternal. And so the night houses endure, walking a razor's edge between faith and heresy, always dependent upon the forges that sustain them, and the hidden masters who seek to turn that dependence into servitude. In the great halls of Mars, a single warning is etched into the databanks of the Ordo Reductor. When the forge whispers, listen not. When the machine spirit hungers, feed it not. For in that hunger waits the eye. The galaxy has known endless war, but with the coming of the 42nd Millennium, something far worse unfolded, something that tore the very fabric of reality asunder. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, split the galaxy in two, an open wound of howling warp storms that bled corruption and terror into every corner of the Imperium. Planets disappeared overnight. Astropathic links failed. Imperial sectors that had stood for 10,000 years were swallowed in darkness. The age of Imperium Nihilus was born, the Dark Imperium, and it was in this hour of despair that the Night Houses faced their gravest challenge since the Horus heresy. But they would not face it alone. For from the ashes of near collapse, the Emperor's will moved once more. The Indomitus Crusade had begun. It was Robout Guillemon, Primarch of the Ultramarines, returned from the tomb of history, who led this grand counterattack. At his side stood the newly forged Adeptus Astartes Primaris, mighty war engines of the Mechanicum, and vast fleets of the Navis Imperialis. But it was not only the Space Marines who answered Guillemon's call. The night houses, scattered across the stars, stood ready. They had never broken their oaths. They had bled for the Imperium for 10,000 years. Now they would march once again, reforged in fire and bound in renewed purpose. For many night worlds, the opening days of the Great Rift were pure calamity. Planets such as Drachenwald, home to House Ferris, found themselves severed from all outside contact as the warp storms swallowed their sectors. Months turned into years as they endured alone. Xenos raiders, Chaos warbands, and even Splinter Hive fleets descended upon isolated worlds, testing the Knights beyond any previous siege. The Knights of Ferris fought unceasingly against the horrors encroaching on their borders. When the Indomitus Crusade reached Drachenwald at last, the world was in ruins. But the banners of House Ferris still flew. Only half of the house's original lances survived. Their ancient fortress keep had been shattered. Entire bloodlines had been extinguished, but their thrones mechanicum still pulsed. Their war engines still stood. Their scions, gaunt and exhausted, stood before Guilliman's envoys and offered only one statement: "We have held, my lord, and we stand ready to march again." Elsewhere, the crusade found houses on the brink of annihilation. On Solgar 9, House Valancourt had spent nearly 2 decades locked in battle with the Black Legion, fending off wave after wave of Abaddon's warbands. Their keep was little more than a cratered shell by the time Indomitus fleets broke through the rift's currents and arrived. The scions of Valancourt, rather than waiting for reinforcements to land, launched one final assault alongside the Crusade's vanguard. Their knights, held together by patchwork repairs, charged directly into the ranks of Chaos Knights and demon engines that had encircled the planet's final loyalist bastion. The sight of the tattered Valancourt banners riding into battle alongside newly arrived Primaris Space Marines rekindled the morale of the battered defenders. Solgar 9 was reclaimed. The Indomitus Crusade did not simply bring deliverance, it brought renewal. For the first time in millennia, the Night Houses gained access to new technologies, long restricted or lost. Under the authority of Guilliman and the Mechanicus new High Fabricator Dominus, ancient STC vaults were reopened. Fragmentary knowledge of the dark age of technology was reclaimed, carefully, cautiously. New night patterns emerged. The Knight Castellan, with its devastating volcano lance, joined the ranks of the houses as an artillery god of war. The Knight Valiant, with its conflagration cannon and thundercoil harpoon, became a siege breaker against both Xenos Titans and demon engines. Even the light classes were reforged. The Armiger Warglaive and Helverin offered houses increased flexibility, allowing them to deploy hunting lances capable of navigating even the most complex war zones. With these new war machines came new tactics, new lances, and a fresh breed of scions raised in the crucible of the Dark Imperium. The Night Houses were evolving. Yet even in renewal, new burdens emerged. The Indomitus Crusade was not a singular war, but an endless cascade of overlapping conflicts, each more desperate than the last. Entire night houses were broken and remade in the fires of these wars. On the hive moon of Itharis, House Melovian faced an unprecedented Tyranid invasion. The High Fleet Leviathan had penetrated the sector's defenses with sickening speed, consuming all in its path. Melovian's scions devised a desperate plan. Their remaining knights formed an unbreakable phalanx directly in the feeding path of the Tyranid swarm, acting as both shield and bait. They fought for 6 continuous days, their ion shields failing one by one, their reactors overheating as biomass waves crashed into their line. But their sacrifice bought the time needed for Guilliman's crusade fleet to arrive. When the final knight fell, his suit torn apart by Trigon Bio-Titans, the fleet's exterminatus bombardment obliterated the remaining swarm. Itharis was lost, but the sector was saved. House Melovian was elevated to martyrdom across all knightly orders. As the Indomitus Crusade advanced, the scions learned they were not merely fighting old enemies in new places. They were facing new horrors entirely. The Great Rift had birthed entities that defied classification. Warped Xenos hybrids, subdimensions bleeding into real space, and entire splinter realities where time itself no longer functioned as it should. On the fractured world of Charon's Hollow, House Varus was deployed against a new breed of Chaos Knights known as Nullborn, whose thrones mechanicum were fused with warp entities that devoured not only the minds of their pilots, but the souls of those they faced. Entire lances of House Varus vanished into silence mid-combat as the Nullborn's presence erased their very existence from reality. In the end, only a combined assault of Imperial Knights, Grey Knights and Custodes forced the Nullborn retreat back into the rift. The price was enormous, but the battle confirmed a chilling truth. The enemies of the Indomitus Crusade were evolving, and so too must the Knight Houses. Throughout the Crusade, the bonds between Knight Houses also shifted. For centuries, feuds and rivalries had simmered between certain houses. The politics of Mars, Terra, and the Mechanicus had pulled at their loyalties for millennia. But under the strain of the Indomitus Crusade, many old divisions faded. Loyalty to Terra, loyalty to survival, loyalty to humanity. These became the unifying call. Inter-house alliances flourished. Mixed lances, once rare, became increasingly common as knights of different bloodlines learned to fight side by side in desperate theaters of war. The Cerulean Pact, an alliance of houses Cadmus, Terran, and Griffith, fought as a unified lance formation across dozens of war zones, their combined banner becoming a symbol of unity in a divided Imperium. Their war cries echoed across 1,000 battlefields. By throne and emperor, we ride as one. The Indomitus Crusade reshaped the Knight Houses not only in strength, but in identity. They were no longer mere vassals, no longer ancient relics clinging to forgotten bloodlines. They had become living shields, mobile, flexible, relentless defenders of humanity against horrors even they struggled to name. The Knights, reforged in both tradition and innovation, stood taller than ever before. But even as Guilliman's crusade pushed forward, the Great Rift remained. The galaxy was still broken. The long night was not yet over, and the final trial of the Knight Houses still lay ahead. In the darkness we endure, in the storm we ride. So long as one knight stands, humanity shall never kneel. The galaxy is broken. The Imperium of Man, though reforged in part by Robuti Guilliman's return, stands battered beneath the weight of the Great Rift. Half its worlds lie in eternal night beneath the howling warp storms of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Demons roam freely. Xenos empires rise unchecked. Heresy festers in forgotten corners, and yet, even now, the banners of the Imperial Knights still fly. Through every darkness, through every age of ruin, they have endured. Now, in the era Indomitus, they stand as sentinels on the edge of humanity's last hope, an eternal vigil that may never end. The nature of warfare itself has shifted once more. In this age of ceaseless conflict, the boundaries between battlefronts and homeworlds have collapsed. Warp storms can split open without warning, bringing demonic incursions to once secure planets. Orc empires grow with terrifying speed. Tyranid tendrils slither across sectors previously thought immune. Entire planetary populations turn overnight to heresy, consumed by genestealer cults or whispers of chaos. The Astra Militarum, the Astartes, even the Custodes, none are sufficient to hold every world, and so the Knight Houses have become more vital than ever before. They are no longer merely war engines of noble houses, they are humanity's roving bulwarks, the line that stands when every other has fallen. Many houses have become semi-nomadic in response to the Imperium's desperation. Entire knight crusades have formed, self-contained fleets of knight lances, sacristan forges, and civilian support elements traveling from war zone to war zone, answering distress signals where local forces have been overrun. These crusades operate on the razor's edge of imperial law, answering both the call of the High Lords and the desperate pleas of planetary governors alike. The Crusade of Iron Resolve, led by High Monarch Cassivar of House Raven, has become one of the most legendary such fleets. Operating deep within the warp-racked northern reaches of the Imperium Nihilus, they maintain no fixed night world. Their fleet is their fortress, their thrones mechanicum carried aboard void-hardened barges. Their lances have saved dozens of isolated hive worlds from annihilation. Yet with every campaign, their numbers dwindle. Their sacristans toil without rest. Their scions are born and raised aboard starships, trained for battle from the cradle. Their knights are held together by a blend of sacred rite and mechanical desperation. Still, they ride. Elsewhere, certain night worlds remain bastions of ancient stability. House Terran, its banners still resplendent, continues to defend its homeworld Voltoris with unyielding pride. Though the rift cuts much of Segmentum Solar into isolated pockets, Voltoris stands as a shining example of what a night world can be: prosperous, ordered, defiant. House Terran now serves as a beacon for other houses, a hub of diplomacy, alliance, and reinforcement for scattered lances across the Imperium Sanctus. Their heraldry is now seen not only on Voltoris, but across the Indomitus Crusade's northern campaigns, lending strength wherever the fighting grows most dire. But not all houses have weathered the new age so well. The Freeblade phenomenon has accelerated. Where once free blades were rare, now their numbers swell. Some are survivors of night worlds swallowed by the rift, their houses lost entirely. Others are scions driven from their houses by internal strife, unable or unwilling to abide by the ancient codes that their ancestors once followed. And some, perhaps most tragically, are knights who carry the taint of the warp within them, unknowingly compromised by the creeping influence of the dark mechanicum or the great rift's psychic tides. The Ordo Malleus maintains an active watch upon free blade movements, recognizing both their usefulness and their danger. The most famous of these new free blades is the mysterious Knight Penitent, known only as the Morning Blade, whose heavily scarred Knight Crusader has appeared at the turning points of several vital conflicts, delivering devastating fire support before vanishing once more. His origins remain unknown. His purpose, only he knows. The great divide between Questor Imperialis and Questor Mechanicus has also deepened. In the era Indomitus, the Mechanicus has grown bolder, its quest for lost knowledge growing dangerously close to heresy as some Forge worlds push the boundaries of accepted technology. Some night houses, desperate to keep their thrones operational amidst worsening shortages, have grown more entangled with the Adeptus Mechanicus than ever before. Others have grown wary of Mars's ever-tightening grip. Tensions quietly simmer beneath the surface, ancient houses now divided between the purity of loyalty to Terra and the practical necessity of alliance with Mars. There are whispered rumors that some houses may one day splinter entirely from both, declaring true independence as fully sovereign military powers. Whether the Imperium would tolerate such a schism remains uncertain. Even as old threats grow more dangerous, new horrors rise. The tyranids continue to adapt, with hive fleets like Leviathan and Kronos breaking through Imperial defenses in increasingly terrifying forms. Their bio-titans now match even the mightiest knights in duels of sheer ferocity. The Necrons have awakened in greater numbers, their ancient legions deploying their towering obelisk engines and triarch stalkers to counter the once unmatched maneuverability of Knight Lances. The forces of chaos, especially Abaddon's Black Legion, strike ever deeper, deploying corrupted Dreadblades and demonically possessed Chaos Knights, whose thrones mechanicum are fused fully with warp entities. These mockeries of the Code Chivalric remain the Night House's most hated foes. And the Tau Empire, though distant, has begun deploying new combat walkers capable of engaging Night Lances at long range, a rising danger on the eastern fringe. Despite it all, the Night Houses continue to endure, because they must. They are more than warriors. They are the last echo of mankind's lost golden age. They are the heirs of worlds that have stood since the age of technology. Each scion who sits upon the throne mechanicum carries not only their own life, but the voices of every ancestor who fought before them. Their codes remain even when hope fades. We serve the throne. We serve our people. We ride into the fire, and we do not fall. Now, in the era Indomitus, the knights ride knowing that they may never see true peace again. Their fortresses are battlefields. Their banners fly in ruinous skies. Their thrones sing with both the honor of duty and the ghostly echoes of those long dead. Yet there remains one unshakable truth. So long as even one knight remains, mankind will not kneel to the darkness. Their vigil is eternal. The knights ride, the knights endure, the knights will not yield.